Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Centre for One Health conference this year. It's with great pleasure, actually, to introduce our invited speaker this morning, Professor Alistair Vauxhall from the University of York. Alistair is a professor in environmental science, and his research really focuses on understanding emerging and future ecological and health risks posed by chemical contaminants in our natural environment. And I'm really delighted that he has joined us this morning to give us a talk on the global threat of pharmaceuticals in our environment. So I'm going to hand over to Alistair now. Thank you.
Thanks, Liam, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you, and it's a shame we can't all meet in person. What I'm going to do in the next 30 minutes is just talk about work we've been doing looking at the global problem of pharmaceutical pollution. I'd just like to acknowledge a few key people who've been involved in this work. So John Wilkinson is a lecturer in the University of York. Emily, Ali, and Andrea are PhD students. I'd also like to just quickly acknowledge the Global Pharmaceutical Monitoring Consortium, and I'll be drawing quite a lot of what I'm going to present based on the big study that we've done, and so that'll all become clear as I go through the talk, hopefully. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to take you back to the early 2000s in India and Pakistan, and at that time in certain areas of India and Pakistan, people started to see that the vulture populations were crashing, and basically what was happening was 9 species of vultures were declining in terms of their numbers. So this is a statement from Vibhu Prakash from the Bombay Natural History Society, and what he said was there were 9 species of vultures in the wild, numbering 40 million birds in the 1980s, but as you move to the early 2000s, that number had dropped to 60,000. So we're talking here like a massive decline in the number of vultures. A lot of environmental forensics was done to try and find out what was causing this decline, and at the end of that, the conclusion was that it was down to a pharmaceutical, a molecule called diclofenac. And what was happening is the diclofenac was being used by the community to treat lameness in cattle. When the cattle were dying, the vultures were coming in, they were gobbling up the carcasses, they were getting a dose of diclofenac, and that was killing the birds due to metabolic differences between the bird and the human. We think that had quite big human health consequences. So it's thought that it resulted in an increase in the incidence of rabies, and that then resulted in an increase in mortality in the local populations. So I think this is a really good example of a sort of One Health problem of a chemical. But what we're beginning to recognize now is that diclofenac is perhaps just one of the problems of pharmaceuticals in the environment. What we have here is just a fairly simple diagram, just showing the potential pathways by which these molecules can be released to the natural environment. And when you think about the life cycle of a pharmaceutical, there's many points in the life cycle where you're going to get environmental emissions. So in the top corner there, you've got the manufacturing process. It could be that waste pharmaceuticals from that process, so rinsates and things, will be released from the factory out into the surface waters. And we're beginning to recognize that this in some regions is quite an important pathway of entry. You've got the use of the product. So if we take the pharmaceutical, we'll excrete the pharmaceutical. In the developed world, it'll go to a wastewater treatment works. It might be treated, and then it'll be released into surface waters, or it might enter the agricultural environment. And then we got use of medicines in veterinary use, so aquaculture, livestock medicines, and also companion animal treatments. So if we think about livestock medicines, we'll be dosing things like cattle and pigs with large amounts of things like antibiotics. They'll be excreted, and that excrete will either go directly to the soil or be applied to the soil when manure is being used as a fertilizer. So you've got all of these different pathways to the environment, and it's not surprising then that we detect these molecules in soils, surface waters, groundwaters, and even drinking waters. So this was a paper that was published back in 2016. It was a project funded by the German Environment Agency. And what they did in that paper was they pulled together all of the published data on the occurrence of pharmaceuticals in the environment. This particular figure is for water and groundwater and tap water. What you have is the color represents the amount of data that's available. So if you've got a dark red country, that means that there's data on a few hundred pharmaceuticals, lighter red on 30 to 100 pharmaceuticals. And then as you move downwards to the orange and yellow, you can see that they have data on only a handful of pharmaceuticals. And in some instances in those studies, it might be just 1 point in a particular country. You can also see there's quite a lot of grey on that figure. And these are countries where we have no data at all. So I think you can see quite quickly from this figure that you've got big disparities in the data on occurrence of these molecules around the globe. We tend to focus our monitoring in the Western world, in Europe, North America. There's a lot of data now from China and India, but we have large areas of the world where we know very little and large areas of the world where we know nothing. So over the past few years, we've been trying to address that problem. And we've been running a very large campaign. We've called it the Global Pharmaceutical Monitoring Project. We've collaborated with over 100 institutions around the globe. And what we've done is we've sent kit out to those institutions, and I'll show you this in a moment. They've sampled their local river network. They've then sent the samples back to us where we've analysed them. In total, we've done 134 sampling campaigns, so it covers about 250 river systems, and we've managed to cover 104 countries. And straight away from this map, you can see that quite a lot of the countries that were grey in the previous map, we're now monitoring. And quite a lot of the countries where there was only a handful of data, we're now beginning to generate quite a lot of data on the occurrence of these molecules. I'll very quickly talk you through how we worked the study. So we developed these kits. You can see a picture there of the box. In that box, you've got a number of vials. You can see there's a small bucket. So they've got the bucket to do the sampling. You can see hidden at the back, you've got a freezer pack. There's also some syringes in there and some filters. So what would happen is the teams would go out to their local river. They would take a water sample in the bucket. They would filter that water sample. So we do that to remove the bugs effectively that could degrade the pharmaceuticals as they're being shipped back to York. They put it in the vial. They then freeze the vial, freeze the freezer pack, box it all up, and then they courier it back to York. And usually what would happen using someone like DHL, they would be back to York within 1 or 2 days of collection. Once in York, then those samples would be analysed using LCMS-MS, and we would analyse it for 61 different active ingredients. So we're beginning to generate data on a large number of active ingredients in each of these samples. So in total, this study generated over 100,000 data points. That paper is published, so anyone who's interested, if you just drop me an email, I can give you a copy of that paper. So this is how a typical sampling campaign would work then. So this particular sampling campaign was done in Israel and Palestine. It was done on the Alexander River system. So in that system, the river starts over in Palestine. So it's called the Nablus River at that point. It crosses the border into Israel, and then it moves downstream to form the Alexander River, which then enters the Mediterranean Sea. Those red points are the points of sampling. So what we'd do is we'd ask the local teams to basically select sites along the river that cover points of interest, but also give an idea of sort of upstream, downstream concentrations. So for example, if you knew that there was a wastewater treatment works on the system, we'd ask them to take a sample upstream of that wastewater treatment works and downstream of that wastewater treatment works. And on any river, we would take between 6 and 20 different points along the river system. So that begins to give us a picture of how concentrations vary across the river system. Here are just a few pictures. So this is actually sampling of that river. So this is, believe it or not, this is the Alexander River, which doesn't look much like a river. It looks more like a trickle. But this is actually one of the main rivers in Israel. I think it reflects the fact that Israel is quite arid. And you can see the sample being taken there from the middle of the Alexander River. You can see it's also quite engineered, that river. This is sampling in Nairobi in Kenya. So this is a tributary of the Nairobi River. So Lydia there is the collaborator we worked with in Nairobi, and Lydia there is working with her colleague to take a sample from the tributary that flowed, I think, through, this one was actually going through the university campus. This is a site in Germany. So on the bridge there, you've got Sven, who was based at the University of Tübingen. So Sven was a PhD student. This is the Ammer River in Tübingen, and you can see there Sven taking a sample from the bridge in the Ammer River with the bucket, and then filtering it, and that would then be frozen and shipped back to York. So that just gives you a feel for the types of sampling that was done. So obviously that generated a vast amount of data. So as I say, we generated data on over 100,000 samples. So we had duplicate samples for each location. So it would take me a long time to talk you through all of that data. So I'm just going to give you a bit of a snapshot. And the first thing I'm going to present here are average total concentrations for each of the campaigns. So what we did here was we basically took the total concentration of pharmaceuticals across a river campaign. We then averaged them, really to give an idea of the level of gross pollution in a particular system. And these are the top 25 most contaminated systems. As I say, we've got over 130, I think, in total. And you can see that the first thing to see is that the two most polluted in terms of total average were Pakistan. So that's Lahore in Pakistan and La Paz in Bolivia. You can also see that this list of top 25 is dominated by systems in Latin America, Asia, and also Africa, although you do have some European and US systems there. So you can see on the right, you've got Dallas in the US, and you've got Scotland in Glasgow in Scotland. So there were some European and North American sort of sites that were on the top 25. That picture then is actually the most polluted site. So this is the site that had the highest concentration of total pharmaceuticals. So this is one of the locations that we monitored in La Paz in Bolivia. And those buildings behind the picture and behind the river, we think they're associated with pharmaceutical manufacturing. So we think that those high concentrations are probably explained by the manufacturing of pharmaceuticals in that area. In terms of the number of compounds we detected then, so we detected 52 different pharmaceuticals. If you remember, we were monitoring 61. There were some pharmaceuticals that we never detected. So we never detected amoxicillin, never detected cloxacillin, diphenhydramine, miconazole, norfloxacin, oxazepam, and you've got sertraline at the end there. That's probably due to a range of things. So amoxicillin and cloxacillin are actually quite impersistent. They are hydrolytically unstable. So they degrade quite quickly in the environment, and they would also degrade quite quickly during the shipping process. Others of these are quite absorptive. So when they're excreted, they tend to stick to solids, meaning that they don't stay around in the liquid compartment. In terms of the top concentrations that we monitor, paracetamol was the molecule that we tended to see at the highest concentrations. You can see that on the far left there. That's probably not surprising, given the large use of paracetamol. So in the UK, that's the biggest use pharmaceutical. You can see that caffeine is coming in at number 2. That's probably not due to pharmaceutical use. It's coffee and tea drinking. And then we got metformin at number 3. So metformin is a treatment for type 2 diabetes. And I think this reflects the high instance of diabetes in different populations around the world. And then as you move to the right, you can see that things begin to tail off. So at the very end there, we're detecting oseltamivir at very low concentrations. So that's the drug that used to be used in Tamiflu. So that gives you an idea of the concentrations. In terms of detection frequency, the big graph there, basically on the x-axis, you've got the different active ingredients, and on the y-axis, you've got the detection frequency across all of the sampling. So that's 1,052 locations. You can see that we detect carbamazepine, so that's an anti-epileptic treatment, at over 60% of the locations that we monitored. Metformin, again, you can see is appearing. So that's the type 2 diabetes treatment that I just mentioned. So metformin is occurring in about 60% of the samples. And then caffeine is occurring in about 50% of the samples. And then again, if you move to the right of the figure, you can see that there's a few substances that we detect only sporadically. So perhaps one of particular interest is the third one in, that's fluoxetine. Fluoxetine is an antidepressant. It's had a lot of work in terms of environmental effects, but we actually only saw that in about 1% of the samples that we monitored. We also found quite complex mixtures of pharmaceuticals at some of these locations. So if you look at the colored graph, what we have here is on the x-axis, you have the number of compounds detected in a sample. And then on the y-axis, you have the number of sites where that number of compounds was seen. And I think probably the most interesting is the one on the far right. So that was a location where we detected 34 of the 61 different pharmaceuticals. So that particular site was a site in Hong Kong. So it was the Kai Tak River in Hong Kong. And I think for the older people amongst us, you might remember the old Hong Kong airport, Kai Tak Airport, which has now been moved to somewhere else in the island. It's the one where the planes used to fly past the high-rise buildings. That's where the Kai Tak River is, and that's now been sort of redeveloped into sort of quite a sort of nature park. But we see a very complex mixture of pharmaceuticals in that river. So that's probably a combination, I think, of population density and also the low flow of that river. So that hopefully that gives you a feel for what we see in the environment. That then asks the question, well, what does it mean in terms of risks? So this is something that we've been looking at. The way we've approached it is for each of our 52 molecules that we've detected, we've pulled together information on ecotoxicity. So we've pulled information on what are called their apical ecotoxicity data. So this is standard test data that will be generated as part of a regulatory risk assessment. So they include things like effects on reproduction of invertebrates, reproduction and growth in fish, and effects on growth on algae. The second set of data that we pulled together were non-apical ecotoxicity data. So these were non-standard endpoints. So it include things like effects on behavior, effects on the biochemistry of an organism, perhaps effects on things like heart rate in an organism. The third thing that we did in terms of ecological effects is we used a sort of read across where we've put together information on the concentration in the human plasma related to the therapeutic use of a drug. We then estimated the concentration in the plasma in a fish that was exposed to the pharmaceutical, and we compared those two values to sort of get a sort of safe therapeutic base value. So this was based on human therapeutic concentrations. The last thing we considered is not an ecotoxicological relevant endpoint. This is more a human health related endpoint. This is antimicrobial resistance. And what we did here is the Antimicrobial Resistance Industry Alliance have developed a series of safe targets. So they've actually done this for manufacturing of antibiotics. And these are concentrations below which they think the antibiotics won't be selecting for resistance. So what we did is for the antibiotics in our list, we compared those with those values to get an idea whether there might be a risk of resistance selection in the environment or not. Again, I'll very quickly go you through that data. In terms of ecological concerns, over 43% of the locations that we monitored had concentrations of some type of ecotoxicological concern. And you can see there we've got the different approaches. So we've got the apical, the CEC is the approach using the human plasma therapeutic concentration. For the apical endpoints, we also use mixture models to get an idea of what the mixture effect might be. And then on the far right there, you've got the non-apical endpoints. And straight away, you can see from this that that assessment is very much being driven by the non-apical endpoints. And this is because those endpoints tend to occur at concentrations much lower than where you see the apical effects. When we look at the pharmaceuticals that exceeded some of these sort of safe levels, they tended to come from certain classes. So it included things like antidepressants, stimulants, antibiotics, antihistamines, the diabetes treatments like metformin, and also some of the painkillers. And again, that work has recently been published. So if you want a copy of that paper, again, just drop me an email and I can provide that. I think another interesting perspective that came out of the ecological assessment work is that at some of these sites, you had multiple potential effects happening. So what I've done here is I've taken the most polluted locations. So this is the location in Bolivia. And you can see at that location, you've got concentrations of concern for algal growth, Daphnia growth, fish biochemistry, the behavior of fish, and you've also the concentrations in the fish plasma would be expected to exceed the human therapeutic plasma concentration. So you've got lots of different parts of the food web being affected by the different pharmaceuticals. And then on the right there, you've got a similar figure for the Kai Tak River in Hong Kong. So that's the river that had the 34 different active ingredients detected. In terms of antibiotic resistance then, the antimicrobials exceeded the safe levels for developed by the Antimicrobial Resistance Alliance at 17% of the locations. And what I've done here is I've just mapped that out globally, and you can see that there are certain countries of the world where a very high proportion of the samples that we took had concentrations above those safe levels. And again, they tend to sit within Africa, Latin America, and also in Asia. In terms of the molecules that exceeded the safe concentrations, they included ciprofloxacin, clarithromycin, erythromycin, lincomycin, metronidazole, sulfamethoxazole, and trimethoprim. So what's driving all of this? Well, when we asked the collaborators to do the sampling, we also asked them to sort of take notes and provide notes on the background of each of these sites. And what that allowed us to do is begin to look at the characteristics of some of the most polluted sites. We've got a word cloud here, so just illustrating some of the terminology associated with some of the most polluted sites. So it includes things like sewage, industrial, disposal, rubbish, hospital, farming. So it gives you a picture of what's likely driving all of this. So it's a real mixture of potential sources, I think, of these pharmaceuticals. Some of the most polluted sites also had certain characteristics. So some of these sites had political instability. So obviously that site in Israel and Palestine would be an example there. We saw quite high concentrations, particularly at the border. Areas where you had very high population density, so the Hong Kong example would be a good example there. Areas where you have inadequate or very limited sewage connectivity. So this includes some of the African countries and Asian countries. Inadequate sewage treatment, again, the Asian and the African countries. And then also countries where you have very dry climates and hence low river flows and low dilution of the pharmaceuticals being released. So that would be Las Vegas, for example. What I'm going to do in the last few slides then is just give you a few pictures of some of the most polluted sites, some of the more interesting sites. So this is actually the site that had the greatest risk for resistant selection. This was a site in Bangladesh. It had a concentration of metronidazole that was 300 times higher than the safe concentration that's proposed by the Industry Alliance. And when we begin to look into what that site was associated with. You can see some buildings in the background. Behind those buildings, there was a generic pharmaceutical manufacturing factory, which we think might explain the very high concentrations of metronidazole that we saw at that site. This is one of the locations in Nairobi that was heavily polluted. In the top right there, you can see a pipe, and that pipe was effectively just emitting raw sewage directly into the river with no treatment at all. This site again is in Nairobi. You've got the picture at the top there, which sort of feels quite rural, and you might suspect that that wouldn't be heavily polluted with human waste. But when you begin to do a bit of research on the area, what you find is if you use Google Street View and you move a little bit away from the river up the road and you pan round, you see that. And you can see these trucks. These are exhauster trucks. And what these exhauster trucks do is they basically drive around Nairobi, emptying the septic tanks. They then bring the septic tank waste to this location and they dump it directly into the river. So you've got the direct discharge of human waste into the river. And then this is a site in Accra in Ghana. This is a site that's actually been in the news for other things. So this is one of the large dump sites that European and US waste is shipped to. And it's a site where there's a lot of e-waste mining. You can see that there's an informal settlement in the background there, but you've also got the river in between, where we see very high concentrations of pharmaceuticals, particularly antibiotics. And we think, as well as the e-waste being dumped at that location, you've probably got medical waste being dumped as well. There's obviously no control, and that's then leaching out into the river system. And then in Nairobi, we saw general littering. So this is just a picture just taken by the riverbank, where we saw quite high levels of pharmaceuticals. And if you look at that and you beam in, you start to see packages of things like personal care products and over-the-counter medicines just thrown away, and it's probably just leaching into the adjacent river. So just to round up then, hopefully I've convinced you that pharmaceuticals are released to the environment during their manufacturing, the use and disposal. And I think it's fair to say that pretty much wherever there's livestock farming, aquaculture farming, or human populations, you're likely to find pharmaceuticals in the environment. Until now, pharmaceutical pollution in many countries of the world has been ignored. We've had no data. But what we've been able to do in this study is actually fill that data gap. And we generated data on levels in 33 countries that have never been studied before. What the data is showing is that the concentrations are highest in lower middle income countries, and also the risks are highest in lower middle income countries. They tend to be in urban areas where you've got manufacturing inputs, poor waste or wastewater management infrastructure. They seem to be the areas where we see the worst concentrations. It includes a real mix of different substances from different modes of action and classes. A significant proportion of sites have levels exceeding concentrations that are safe in terms of ecology, but also human health when we consider that antimicrobial resistance. But I think the final thing to say is that what the study shows is just the power of global collaboration with some of the new analytical instruments that we have. I think it really allows us now to begin to better understand the exposure of human and animal populations to concentrations of things like pharmaceuticals and other pollutants. So just to finish, if you want to find out more data, we do have a website, so it's www.globalfarms.org. All of the data from the study can be downloaded and seen at that site, including pictures of the study locations that we looked at and information on the monitoring team. And the last thing is, this last couple of weeks, we've had a paper out in One Earth as part of their novel entities special issue, talking about this and talking about a lot of what I've talked about today. I've turned the website into a QR code, so I can just leave that there. So if you want a copy of that paper, I think it can be downloaded using that QR code for 50 days. After that, they're going to paywall it. But if you want to find out a little bit more and perhaps it's quite a light read, I think, find out a bit more, then just click on that and you'll be able to download it. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Wow, that was very interesting. Are the talks actually, any questions? Are they going to come through the chat, Dervla?
Hi, Liam. Yes, they're going to come through the Q&A button.
Okay, through the Q&A. Okay, well, Alistair, I would just like to ask you, starting off on, you know, I know these are emerging contaminants. Is there any possibility, or is there any way we can see them being introduced into legislation or regulation around the Water Framework Directive or environmental monitoring, like they're not routinely tested for?
So that's actually a quite a timely question, because I think the Water Framework Directive EQS list has very recently been updated, may even have been this week, and I think for the first time some of the pharmaceuticals might be appearing on that list. There's also, I think, in terms of the EU, I think the European Commission are quite aware of the issue of pharmaceutical pollution, and they've got quite a lot of initiatives going on. So there's not only the EQSs, they also have something called the watch list. So the watch list is a list of substances that the EU are concerned about, but they don't have quite enough data to say, well, an EQS is needed. So they put them on this watch list, and the idea is that member states then generate monitoring data, perhaps a bit more effects data, and then that will be looked at to see whether an EQS is warranted or not. If you go to that list, there's a lot of antibiotics on the list, and there's also a few other classes. So I think some of the antifungals are now on the watch list as well. So I think in Europe it's happening. One of the issues is that we only have knowledge, I would say, for 200-300 active ingredients. In Europe we use about 2,000. So there's a big grey area. So it could be that we're missing things. And I think one of the things that we probably need to do is begin to sort of look at things that aren't being monitored and we have no data for, and so try and establish whether they are risky or not.
And are veterinary residues, you know, kind of equally as important as those of human origin? Yeah,
it's you tend to get a different type of exposure. So if you look at human drugs, a lot of these drugs as a society we're using them continuously, so they'll occur in the environment continuously. In Europe we'll tend to see the highest drug concentrations will perhaps be a few hundred nanograms per litre in Europe, and then dropping down depending on the active ingredient to a few nanograms per litre. If you look at the veterinary medicines, what you get is a slightly different scenario. Most of them, certainly in Europe, will be around livestock treatments. And there, the farmers will be applying manure or slurry to a field, and then you get rainfall, and that's going to wash the pharmaceuticals into a river or a stream. So you get these pulses going in, and those pulses can reach very high concentrations. So we've done work on some of the veterinary antibiotics where we see microgram per litre levels in UK rivers. So they would be much higher than the equivalent human antibiotic, but they wouldn't be there as long, so they'd be there just for a few days possibly. The other thing that we're getting interested in, so I've got a PhD looking at this, is companion animal medicines. So I always thought companion animal medicines was probably a small route of input, but in the UK we have 22 million cats and dogs, so a third of the human population effectively, and the use of companion animal medicines, so things like the parasiticides, flea treatments and wormers, is going up and up and up. And they're beginning to be detected. So people have detected some of these things just downstream of wastewater treatment works. And we think what's happening is the bedding from the dog's bed, and when you wash the dog in the bath, that stuff's then going down the drain out into the environment. So that's something that we're beginning to think about. And yeah.
And I'm also just thinking here in an Irish context, I think 75 to 80%, we've one of the highest rates in Europe of the land application of biosolids. So our sewage is actually recycled, spread back on the land. So that's probably actually an additional source as well, along with the veterinary.
Yes, yeah. So biosolids are definitely to agriculture, definitely a source of pollutants. So we got a couple of questions actually appearing in the Q&A,
yes,
I think.
Yeah, so we've one from Erwin just saying, very nice talk. Did you also look into metabolites of pharmaceuticals?
So there are a few metabolites in the list. There's only a couple. We didn't look at guanyl urea. We only looked at metformin. But there were a couple of metabolites in the list. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, that there's the parent molecules, and then there's the metabolites. So we've got 2,000 parent molecules, and if you start thinking about metabolites, then that number goes up very, very quickly. So we did look at some, but we didn't look at guanyl urea. It's something we are interested in. So one thing that we do work on is trying to understand the relationship between metabolite toxicity and parent toxicity. One of the things that we do find is it's not always the case, but in general, the metabolites are less toxic than the parent compound. So we've done work with pesticides, for example, where about 80% of the metabolites are a lot less toxic than the parent compound. And then there's a second question
about green prescriptions.
Green prescriptions. Yeah. So I think this is something that has been looked at in Sweden in particular. So the Swedish, I think it's the Stockholm County Council, had a program where they actually developed a sort of eco-labeling approach for medicines. So they handed these little information packs to the medics, and it had like an eco score. And the idea is that the medic would look at that eco score and say, well, actually, I could prescribe you this, or I could prescribe you this. This is less harmful to the environment. Would you prefer it? So I think it is a potential approach. I think we probably need a combination of approaches. So we probably are going to need treatment, wastewater treatment, certainly to bring down some of the levels that we see in Europe. We for some of the more toxic things, we should probably be thinking about benign by design replacements. So whether we can develop new drugs that are perhaps more degradable in the environment. And then I think if you look more globally, some of those sites that I showed photos of, I think we're going to need totally different ways of thinking to tackle those problems. I don't think we can just go in and put in a wastewater treatment works. I don't think that's going to work. I think it's going to need more imaginative solutions. So I think there probably needs to be a real mix of mitigation approaches to solve this problem. And that's actually what we call for in the One Earth article.
Yeah, just one last thing as well. We don't have officially the drug take-back schemes really in Ireland.
Yeah.
People can take them back to pharmacies. I think they have, as research shown, that they've been successful in places like the US.
So we've got them in the UK. We've actually done surveys of to see how successful they are. About 16% of people that we surveyed actually would use a drug take-back scheme. So the take-up is not great, and one of the big problems is people don't really know about it, and they also don't know why. They don't know why they should be using them. So I think there's a lot of education that probably needs to be done to sort of try just convince people about the fact that what we use as society, we're so closely connected to the environment, and I guess that's what your conference is about. the chemicals we use will be going out into the environment, they'll be impacting the environment, and that'll be then kicking back to us. So yeah, I mean, I'd say we have it in the UK. The pharmacists have to take back medicines, but the take up is tiny.
Okay. That's great. Thank you, Alistair. Martin, I have actually just made you co-host as well.
Okay, yeah, so I think I'll try and share the screen. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so I'd like to welcome Dr. Martin Sharkey. Martin is a postdoctoral researcher in the School of Natural Sciences in the Department of Physics, and Martin specializes in the determination of emerging pollutants, particularly in abiotic media. And he's going to talk to us today about persistent organic pollutants in the Irish environment.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Liam. Just give me 1 second here, see if I can get this up and running. Is that being shared now?
Yes, just if you can put it into presentation mode.
How's that looking?
That's great.
Perfect. Thanks very much there. And yeah, thanks again for having me here today as well. It's great to get here and talk a little bit about the research here and hear some very interesting talks. Very interested, especially there in Professor Boxall's talk. We're starting to look at some antibiotics ourselves in the environment in our current research project. That's for a talk for another day. So yeah, today I'm just talking about a little bit about our research over the last number of years, where we've been looking at persistent organic pollutants and emerging substances of concern in the Irish environment. This all came as the kind of knowledge of POPs in the Irish environment in general is quite lacking, especially since the introduction of the Stockholm Convention and Ireland's signing for it. The knowledge of how much was actually in the environment wasn't great, so we needed to actually do some surveys to find out how much was in circulation, how much was in the environment, how big an issue it would have been or it is for us going forward. And so we have a number of projects over the last 7 years. See if I can just get the 1 moment here. Okay, there's a laser pointer here. You can see number of projects over the last number of years. So we have wafer and safer projects where we are looking at the quantities of POP flame retardants in in recyclable goods and end-of-life materials. We had fuel where we were analyzing the presence of POPs in landfill leachate as well as in the areas surrounding those areas. Elevate projects, some colleagues of mine, Nina Vemkin and Marie Coggins, were doing, looking at POPs, perfluoroalkyl substances and flame retardants in the indoor environment, in dust and water, and as well as breast milk. And our current study here, TerraChem, where we're looking at more emerging contaminants in the environment. So it's very quick for people who might not be too familiar. Persistent organic pollutants are listed under the Stockholm Convention, and they're defined as POPs under very specific criteria to do with their long-term sustainability in the environment, their propensity for long-range transportation, their propensity for bioaccumulating in the living tissues, and they're being toxic to wildlife and animals. They're actually a list of the worst chemicals in terms of environmental pollutants, from toxicity to bioaccumulation to their persistence in the environment. And the idea of the convention is to find these the worst chemicals and have them restricted in as much as is possible to be, in order to remove them from circulation and get safer alternatives, ideally, to replace them. Just looking at the POPs here, we first have the first generation of POPs, the dirty dozen here, mostly herbicides and pesticides, with a few industrial chemicals and unintentional byproducts. But as the years went on, there was more added to it, in particular for my research, looking at the brominated flame retardants, as well as the perfluoroalkyl substances. So these are your surfactants and water repellents that are added to all manner of things, from food contact articles to clothing to furniture. And the flame retardants themselves, they're quite ubiquitously used. If you look around your room there, you'll find a couple of dozen odd things that have been treated with flame retardants, likely as not. From the carpets, curtains, your furniture, even vehicle foams. You'd have your computers and any sort of electronics, the plastics from them. They're all used as additive flame retardants in those. Yeah, the research over the last couple of years we've been doing have been looking at these flame retardants and perfluoroalkyl substances in a range of different media. Mostly for the first couple of years looking at waste and recyclable goods, looking at plastics, textiles and foams from a range of goods. Again, the idea being is that these flame retardants were restricted, or were like in line to be restricted at the time we were doing the research here. And we want to find out how much is actually in circulation in the waste goods being produced, how much is going into the recycling stream, and how much is going to be recycled into new products. And this is just a quick overview of the results we found, where we found a number of tons per year of different materials that are considered hazardous waste because they contain too high concentrations of these flame retardants in the plastics of the materials of the consumer products. You see a lot of construction and demolition waste. It's largely the insulation foams, a lot of electronic goods, your display, your TVs, small domestic appliances and computers, and then also a lot of furniture items, carpets, furniture foams, and upholsteries, all readily treated with these flame retardant chemicals that are now banned because of their persistence and toxicity and bioaccumulation potential. As part of this research as well, we are trying to develop methods for the screening of this waste to try and find out which waste was safe to recycle and which waste was not safe to recycle. That's where we developed some screening using X-ray fluorescence for elemental bromine as a surrogate for the flame retardants. And we found to be very successful in being able to screen just for the hazardous flame retardants. Up to about 95% of the waste was successfully screened as either being above or below this concentration limit. It was quite good for only using a surrogate method and not being the most gold standard method, let's say, compared to the likes of GC or LCMS for the same purpose. The other study we were doing, the landfill leachate study, and also just the general landfill environment. We want to look at the quantities that were like from the first study. We knew that lots of this waste was going to contain these pop flame retardants, and historically in Ireland, landfilling would have been the primary method of disposing of waste. And for electronic goods, that's changed a lot in recent years since the introduction of the WEEE directive, and most of that's now being segregated and sent to recycling. But for the likes of furniture foams and vehicular foams, especially the automotive shredder residue, the leftovers from vehicles after the good stuff is taken away, essentially the metals and anything reclaimable, that's all still being sent to landfill to this day, and they are known to contain flame retardants and in some cases the perfluoroalkyl substances. Now, it's a lot to take in this slide here, but the kind of salient point here is that despite the fact that these flame retardants are quite ubiquitous in the waste going into the landfills, there wasn't a whole pile compared to other studies found in the leachate itself. But in saying that, there was quite a few number of other studies that were conducted. So it's comparable, say, to the Canadian study here, but quite a bit lower than the South African study. And that's could likely because the size of the landfills here are quite a bit smaller than you'd find in bigger countries, the likes of South Africa or Canada or even China. But the big point here is that the perfluoroalkyl substances we found, so PFOS and PFOA here, are the ones which are restricted under the Stockholm Convention. So they're listed as persistent organic pollutants at the moment. And they're very high compared to other studies worldwide, with the exception of China here. So we know that in these landfills that POP BF4s and PFASs are present, and PFASs in particular are quite high. Not only these ones that are restricted, but also the replacement ones here. So PFNA, PFBS, FOSA, and PFHXS. Some of them are direct replacements of these two PFOSs after they were found to be toxic and harmful to the environment and ultimately restricted. Looking more at the indoor environment, we also did outdoor air monitoring from at these sites, looking at upwind and downwind, as well as groundwater samples. And again, we find measurable concentrations of BF4s and quite high concentration of PFASs again around these areas, a lot higher compared to other studies conducted around Europe, especially. Looking at the study that Nita Vemken and Marie Coggins carried out, this was looking at POPs in the indoor environment. So just a quick snapshot of the PFASs here in tap water, where it's found to be quite prevalent here and comparable, if not higher in some cases, to other studies conducted around Europe. But the bigger finding for the study, or one of the big findings of the study, was the concentrations of PFASs in human milk from Ireland. We found the concentrations here are quite high, especially when you consider per capita population in this country compared to other countries around the world here, where similar studies have been done, and see quite high concentrations of the PFASs there. There were also flame retardants found in these, again at comparable concentrations to what was found in other studies around the world. And so from this, from these studies, it was kind of known or found, I guess, it was shown that these POPs are quite prevalent in the Irish environment, even though they've been restricted, although in some cases, for the likes of PFOA and some of the flame retardant mixtures, that they've only been restricted in recent years. So the idea with these restrictions being that they're no longer being used, they're not allowed to be in recyclable goods and then reused in new goods. But the question is how effective those systems actually were in removing them from circulation. From what we found and what we showed with the development of the XRF study was that it could be used as a way to remove things from circulation, but the actual uptake of it was quite low because of the relative time it took to use the device, or just the difficulty in using it or implementing it along with typical recycling schemes. And then in terms of PFASs, it's quite tricky to detect those in relevant materials. So it's more coming from the manufacturing side, where these chemicals are now restricted and can no longer be used. The problem being, though, is that when those chemicals are banned, the standard here is to shift to an alternative chemical that has very similar characteristics in order to fill that gap. And so one of the things we did over the last couple of years was reviewing the efficacy of the Stockholm Convention and the resulting POPs regulation in Europe, to see how effective it actually was in removing harmful contaminants, not just the contaminants that were banned under the Stockholm Convention, but the ones that were used to replace them. As we saw, some of the formulations, penta and octa brominated diphenyl ethers, were restricted in 2004, and these were replaced by another brominated diphenyl ether, deca-BDE, and hexabromocyclododecaine. They were largely used as the replacements for flame retardants in the likes of electronic goods, in furniture foams, and insulation foams. It was always HPCDD. But then HPCD and deca-BDE themselves were restricted in later years. So it was a drop-in replacement, just one additive BF4 for another additive BF4, without full knowledge of the hazards that actually posed to people and the environment. And sure enough, they were found to be hazardous in their own right, and then restricted. Now we see increased concentrations of replacement flame retardants to those. So we have tetrabromoyl bisphenol A, TBDPE, TBBP, TAZ. I'm not going to go through all the acronyms here, but a list of other brominated and organophosphate flame retardants that are roughly the same, mechanically speaking, in terms of how they act as flame retardants, the only difference being the actual constituents of the chemicals themselves. And this was something we did over the last number of years, looking at the presence of these legacy and the emerging replacement flame retardants in a range of consumer goods. This is just one of the materials we looked at, children's products, where we found flame retardants being used in car seats, mattresses, changing mats. You can see all the range of materials that we're looking at here. But the real issue was that the concentrations we were finding in the mat were incredibly high. And this is the average concentrations here of TDC-IPP, which is the chlorinated organophosphate flame retardant, at roughly 10% of the mass by volume, or by weight, sorry. And then there's also high concentrations of these the restricted flame retardants here, of the other organophosphate flame retardants, and then the emerging brominated flame retardants. I've mixed this up a little bit, but I'll get to the slide in a second. So looking at the screening of materials, because of the increased shift towards these alternative flame retardants, we see a decrease in efficacy of the screening methods we developed and the other places are using. The idea being that if you're using elemental bromine as a surrogate, you don't have to use the GCMS methods, as they're quite time consuming and costly. So they can't really keep up with the demand of the amount of materials being produced every year. But a decrease in efficacy of roughly 7% over a 5-year period because of increased concentrations of the alternatives. And you might say that's a very good thing, because the POP BFRs are being removed from circulation in lieu of replacement flame retardants. The issue being that these replacements are themselves being found to have issues. So we have TBPA, which is a H410 substance, so toxic to aquatic organisms, endocrine disrupting, and it's under PBT assessment, so assessment as a persistent bioaccumulable and toxic substance. Similar case with the DBDPE under PBD assessment. And then these two in particular, which are very prevalently used in the childcare articles, suspect a carcinogen, and one is shown to have a reproductive toxicity. So the trend here is that these flame retardants are being used, and then once one is banned, a replacement is put in with similar characteristics, but might have, especially in the case of the likes of TBPA here, this will likely never be listed as a POP, because its environmental half-life is too low to meet the threshold, whereas it is still shown to be bioaccumulable, it is still shown to undergo longer transportation, and is shown to be toxic to different organisms. So it's a question of whether the harsh listing of the worst of the worst under the Stockholm Convention is effective enough in actually doing long-term sustainable effect of removing these pollutants from circulation. And this is mostly to do with right now the electronic goods and plastics from electronics where these flame retardants are being used. But in the coming years, there's going to be another issue with especially textile waste. By 2025, textile waste is expected to be a separate recycling stream, where there's to be segregated like it is for glass and electronics and for cardboards and everything. But because of the concentration of these hazardous chemicals in them, it's going to face the same issue, that some of it is going to be considered hazardous waste, but still introduced into the recycling stream because there's too much of these either legacy hazardous flame retardants or these emerging flame retardants of concern. And I'm conscious I've gone a little bit over time, so I'll just try and fly through this by also mentioning that the PFAS and PFOA, the water repellents that you find in your food contact articles, find in frying pans, and anything kind of water repellent, are similar to the flame retardants. And PFOS was restricted in 2009, replaced by PFBS, PFOA in 2019, replaced by PFHXS. These are quite generalized, but these were cited as suitable drop-in replacements for the restricted chemicals. In our LEACHES study, we saw that the PFOS concentrations we expect to be much higher compared to, was actually quite low compared to other studies, but the replacement PFBS was actually on the rise. And for PFOA, it was the highest of them all, but we also saw concentration of PFHXS indicating that it's becoming more regularly used, and that will likely continue in the coming years. The issue here being is the PFBS is listed as a substance of very high concern under the European Chemicals Agency, and PFHXS is listed as a POP as of this year. And so you see these drop-in replacements are showing very similar, if not worse, properties as its predecessors, but because we can't restrict them unless we have full toxicological data or can say definitively that they're a POP, then they're going to be in circulation for a number of years, and then a replacement's going to come in. It's particularly an issue for PFASs because there's between 4,500 and 5,000 different PFAS substances identified to date. Just to really quickly summarize here on the whole point, I guess, of this presentation, and that the use of these chemicals were, especially the flame retardants, are based on quite old regulations. In Ireland in particular, the furniture fire safety standards are one of the most strict in Europe. So it requires the use of a lot more additive flame retardants in them to meet these criteria being quite outdated compared to what's common across Europe, and also what's actually realistic in terms of consumer habits. And there's a lot of talk now in actually cutting to the root of the problem and revising these standards, as opposed to just banning a flame retardant and then allowing another flame retardant to come in as a replacement, which could have similar environmental or toxicological properties. And that would be the same in terms of PFASs as well, because there's so much more that could be used as replacements to the ones already being used. So the hope here is we can start being proactive as opposed to reactive in determining risk of additive substances, instead of only banning them after fulfilling a very specific criteria. And just very quick to mention the current research project, where we're trying to look ahead at the range of emerging contaminants in the Irish environment. The idea being to see if the replacement chemicals or replacement to the banned chemicals are there at high concentrations or at measurable concentrations alongside the ones that were banned or are in the process of being banned. So we can demonstrate a clear trend of regrettable substitutions, and then can push for alternative methods for removing them from circulation, like revising the fire safety standards, like reducing the use of PFAS as surfactants. It's typically the cheapest method for water stain proofing available, and as well as decreasing the use of plasticizers and decrease the use of plastic overall, especially in lieu of the issue that microplastics has for the environment as well. So yeah, I will finish it up there. I've gone well over time, apologies for that. Also just to acknowledge that a lot of the research has been done between the University of Birmingham and the University of Galway here, largely funded by the EPA research program over the last couple of years. And the research team who's been working over the couple of years, myself, Dr. Coggins, Professor Healy, and Professor Beresheim are currently working on the research project, the TerraChem project there. And Will Stubbings, Daniel Drage, Mohammed Abdallah, Nina Vemkin, and Harold Beresheim all worked over the last couple of years as well. Yeah, sorry, there's a lot to get through. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. But if not, my contact details are there, so please get in touch with me anytime you like. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Martin. That was really interesting. Thank you. It seems to me that they're following a similar pattern to the pesticides, where one generation that replaces a previous generation is soon found out to be just as toxic or just as harmful to the environment.
That's exactly it. Yeah, it's definitely the trend we're seeing. It's yeah, like we were actually at a conference there in Athens, talking about flame retardants, talking about brominated flame retardants in particular, largely in insulation foams, and talking to someone from that side of the aisle who's on the manufacturing and supply side of flame retardants. And they said they have a congener, a reactive flame retardant that could be readily used in insulation foams in your plasterboard or your Kingspan, that would be reactive and wouldn't leach out as easily and could be much more easily removed from the insulation after being used. The problem is it's just more expensive than the additive that's mixed in during the casting process. And as you would expect as a company, they don't want to increase the price of their products, and they won't. If they increase the price, that'll pass on to the consumer. So they go with the cheap alternative until they're forced to move away from it. So that's just the unfortunate reality of it.
Okay. Thanks, Martin. Anything else that we can cover up in the discussion afterwards anyhow?
Okay.
So I'd like to welcome our next speaker, who's Parvin Hassani-Zadeh. Parvin is a second-year PhD student in microbiology. She's an early-stage researcher, I think, on a Marie Curie ITN, and she's going to talk to us about some of the work from her PhD studies this morning. And Parvin, I've made you a co-host so you can share your presentation there with us.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen. Sorry. Just one moment. I need to open my presentation again.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Parvin.
Thank you. So I'm Parvin Hassani-Zadeh. I'm a second-year PhD student and very happy to present my work on the impact of nickel and cobalt stress on soluble microbial product and EPS production in anaerobic digestion and potential for selective metal recovery. Nickel and cobalt are two important metals in different industries, especially for the production of lithium-ion batteries and stainless steel material. They also are two essential metals for the microorganism. However, at high concentration, they can be toxic to the microorganism because they indirectly can cause toxicity at high concentration and also can interfere in enzymatic reaction. So recovering such metal from waste like mining waste, which contain a high concentration of this metal, could be beneficial both in terms of resource recovery and environmental safety. These two metals are at adjacent positions in periodical tables, so they have similar chemical behavior and they always coexist in the waste stream like mining waste. And such similar properties make their selective recovery so challenging because they always tend to precipitate or leach together in the currently used chemical method for their recovery. Research have shown that in biological systems, like in bacterial culture, nickel and cobalt have different solubility, and such differences in their solubility that is caused by bacteria could be basis for developing technologies for selectively recover them from different ways. But the first step is to find the reason for such differences in metal solubility that's caused by bacteria, and one of the possible reasons could be related to the extracellular compounds which are produced by bacteria and have metal binding affinities. There are two main groups of extracellular compounds which are produced by bacteria. The first group, which are attached to the outer surface of the microbial cell, are called EPS or extracellular polymeric substances. And the second group, which are present in bulk media, are called soluble microbial products. Both EPS and SMP are pools of organic matters, especially protein, polysaccharides, and humic substances, and they serve different structural and functional roles in the microorganism. The origin of this compound could be the macromolecule that resulted from cell lysis, EPS decay, or the one that are produced by microorganisms and secret for different purposes, like for cell-to-cell communication. Metal toxicity were reported to change the content and composition of EPS and SMP in different ways. It can increase cell lysis, EPS decay, or more importantly, it can induce the production of some extracellular components with metal binding affinities that this compound can capture metal ion, change their bioavailability for the bacteria, and in this way reduce their toxicity and solubility. And some of these compounds, which were mainly protein, were reported to have a selectivity in binding different metals. So in order to identify such compound and optimize the production pathway, the idea is to expose the microbial cell or the microbial consortia under a high concentration of a specific metal. And as a defensive mechanism, some of these microorganisms can produce these kind of extracellular compounds. And when these compounds are identified, they can be potential candidates for developing biosorbents for selective metal recovery. For example, they can be immobilized on solid surfaces to be non-living biosorbents, or they can be expressed on the surface of some host microorganism to act as living biosorbents for selective metal recovery from waste. A diverse group of the microorganisms were reported to produce such kind of compounds with metal binding affinities. And in this research, we are going to focus on the microbial consortia involved in anaerobic digestion process. Or AD process is a bio-based technology which is used for the treatment of different kind of waste in absence of oxygen. And the diverse group of bacteria and archaea which are work together in this process convert different biodegradable materials in waste into valuable materials or products like volatile fatty acid, or the end product of this process is biogas, which contain a high amount of biomethane, which is a source of energy. Moreover, a diverse group of bacteria and archaea are involved in this process, which increases the chance of finding a microorganism with the desired properties, like the one that produce extracellular component with metal binding affinity. So the aims of this project was to find or investigate the impact of nickel and cobalt stress on EPS and the soluble microbial product production in anaerobic digestion, and also to find the association between nickel and cobalt solubility and toxicity with EPS and SMP content, and to know if nickel and cobalt solubility is different in anaerobic digestion or not. And to answer these questions, several batch experiments, which are called biomethane potential assay, were done with sewage sludge as the inoculum and glucose as substrate. And after incubation under anaerobic digestion for 48 hours, EPS was extracted using heating method, and the protein and carbohydrate content of EPS and SMP was characterized. Methanogenic activity of the microbial consortia in terms of methane production and soluble COD removal was measured, and metal solubility was measured. Then the correlation between metal solubility with the other evaluated factor was investigated. This graph shows that methane production and soluble COD at as in line with increasing both metal concentration, methane production decreased while the soluble COD increased. And this shows that both metal at the tested concentration were toxic to the microbial consortia in AD. However, nickel showed higher toxicity compared to cobalt in this experiment. The two graphs here show EPS and SMP protein and carbohydrate. And the protein content of EPS and SMP, which are in blue and red here, decreased aligned with increasing metal concentration. However, there wasn't any significant change in the carbohydrate content in response to metal stress. And such decrease in protein content in EPS and SMP could be related to the high concentration of the two metals that we used, which was possibly higher than the capacity of the microbial consortia in AD to sequester these metal ions. So the free metal concentration of the metal concentration increased and impacted the protein production pathway, so less protein were produced. The solubility of nickel and cobalt both increased with increasing total metal concentration And at each tested concentration, nickel showed higher solubility compared to cobalt. And such higher solubility of nickel could explain the higher toxicity of nickel that we observe in terms of methane production. Pearson correlation analysis that we did showed a high negative correlation between metal solubility, methanogenic activity, and EPS protein content, and such a negative correlation showed could be related to the critical role of EPS in sequestering metal ion as a defensive mechanism, so reducing the metal solubility and protecting methanogens against metal toxicity. And we published the result of this step of my work in Ecotoxicology and Environmental Safety Journal. And in the second step of this work, the impact of sulfate addition and the solubility and toxicity of nickel and cobalt was investigated. The point in using sulfate in this experiment to know the impact on the nickel and cobalt was that this compound can provide the condition for growth of a group of bacteria called sulfate-reducing bacteria, or SRB. The SRB can use sulfate as their terminal electron acceptor, and then they can produce sulfide as an end product. Sulfide can bind metal ion and change their solubility and toxicity. So here we wanted to know if growing SRB aligned with the other microbial consortia in anaerobic digestion can change metal solubility and toxicity or not. To answer this question, the impact of nickel, cobalt, and both metal and the methanogenic activity of granular sludge in the presence and absence of sulfate was measured. And to know if chemical precipitation could be the reason for nickel and cobalt differences in nickel and cobalt solubility, we incubated some bottles just with medium and metal. And interestingly, we found that sulfate addition at each tested condition increased methane production, and this increase was even higher in the control without sulfate. So this increase couldn't be just related to the role of sulfide in precipitating metal ion and reducing their toxicity. We also found that with granular sludge, cobalt showed a higher toxicity compared to nickel. The bar graph here showed the pH at each tested concentration. We found that the pH was in the acidic range in all the tested conditions except the control with sulfate. And such a low pH could be related to the volatile fatty acid accumulation in this condition as a result of glucose degradation. And this low pH impacted the methanogenic activity. However, in the control with sulfate, the pH was still in the neutral range and near the initial pH, which was 7. And in the other condition, it seems that sulfate addition increased methane production. And such enhancement in methane production by sulfate addition could be related to the regulating role of SRB, or sulfate-reducing bacteria, for pH, that they can produce sulfide, which is an alkaline compound, and can increase pH and make the pH suitable for methanogens activity. We also measured EPS protein and EPS and total organic carbon of EPS from granular sludge at each condition. And we found that in the condition without sulfate, that here is in blue color, we found that in response to nickel and cobalt stress, both EPS protein and total organic carbon of EPS increased, while in the condition without sulfate, which are in orange here, the EPS protein and EPS carbohydrate didn't change in response to metal toxicity. In the control without biomass, we found that nickel and cobalt had high similar solubility, while in the two other conditions with biomass, cobalt showed a higher solubility than nickel, and such differences in the nickel and cobalt solubility in the condition with biomass, which could be related to bacterial activity, as it didn't happen in the control without biomass. We also found that with sulfate addition, metal solubility decreased a bit, which was possibly due to the precipitation of metal as metal sulfide, while the difference between nickel and cobalt solubility increased, which is interesting in terms of selectively recover them through through an aerobic digestion process. So in summary, we found that nickel and cobalt have different toxicity and solubility based on the source of the biomass, and such differences in their solubility could be interesting. We found in terms of selective recovering them from waste actually. We found that metal toxicity can change EPS and SMP content and composition, and protein content of EPS and SMP were related to the metal solubility and toxicity at each tested condition. Sulfate addition enhanced methanogenic activity in all these tested conditions, and we also found that it can increase the differences between nickel and cobalt solubility. And in the next step of this work, we are going to do metaproteomics analysis to find the extracellular protein that may have nickel and cobalt binding affinity and cause such differences between nickel and cobalt solubility in anaerobic digestion. And thank you so much. I'm happy to hear any question.
Thank you very much, Parvin. Thank you very much. Very interesting. I just have one quick question for you. I guess the cobalt to some extent is a micronutrient. Is the nickel actually more toxic than the cobalt?
Well, both are micronutrients that are needed, especially in anaerobic digestion. There are some enzymes that need both nickel and cobalt as their cofactor. But the toxicity is more related to the solubility and bioavailability. It's not related to, I don't think that it's related to their role, as we found that with the flocculant sludge, cobalt, nickel was had higher toxicity, while with the granular sludge, it was cobalt that had higher toxicity.
Okay, thank you. And if there's any other questions, we can take those later or during the break. I'd like to welcome our next speaker, who's Guangshu Wu. And Guangshu is a senior lecturer in civil engineering here in the University of Galway. And he's funded under the GUF. And before joining the university in 2021, he worked in Shenzhen International Graduate School in China, and his research interests include nutrient cycling, microbial interactions, and pollution control in natural and engineered environmental systems. So Guangshu, thank you very much, and I've made you a co-host so you can share now too.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So now you can see the slide?
Yes, if you can just put it into full presentation mode.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you for the introduction, Lim, and also thank you very much, for giving me this opportunity to present, our research. This research was started, from this year. So the topic is about leveraging anaerobic biodegradation of tetracycline by enriching K strategies. So this topic is similar, to that Parvin's. So maybe some background information that should be similar. So my presentation includes the following 4 sections. The first one is about background. As we know that antibiotics are widely used, for treating diseases in both humans and also animals. For example, here this figure shows the typical types of that antibiotics used. For example, here for tetracycline, this is one of the dominant types of these antibiotics. Also, after using of these antibiotics, not all of them can be, completely used up. So some of these antibiotics will be released, to the environment. Especially here, this figure shows, finally that this wastewater or maybe solid waste, that should be the key carriers, for this transport of antibiotics. So that's why, it's very important to control these antibiotics, maybe in the stage of this wastewater treatment, or maybe solid waste, management. That's why we just hope to treat, these antibiotics by anaerobic digestion technologies. As the previous presentation also mentioned, AD process is a sustainable technology for treating both wastewater or maybe solid waste. In this process, that not only that pollutants, including antibiotics, can be removed, and also renewable that energy can be recovered. But anyway, for this process, that includes diverse types of that microorganisms, and also with the participation of both bacteria and also that archaea. So, for example, here for breaking down complex organic matters finally to that CH4 or maybe CO2, at least 3 stages will occur. So here goes another question. With the existence of these antibiotics in the wastewater or maybe in the solid waste, 2 key questions should be answered. The first one is, will antibiotics inhibit microbial activities and also that interactions? Another one is that can antibiotics be removed efficiently through this AD process? From the previous studies, it showed that TC can be removed through this AD process with different technologies and also with different substrates. But usually for antibiotics removal in this AD system, due to their low concentrations, antibiotics can be removed through that co-metabolism or maybe through that bioabsorption. These 2 processes should be the key approaches. So anyway, based on this, we think, can we enhance that tetracycline, that removal in AD system? So another aspect is the RK selection theory, because antibiotics concentration is quite low in the wastewater or maybe solid waste. So, and this condition, if microorganism, will remove this tetracycline, they should have high affinity, for this antibiotics. So usually for in each type of that ecosystem, at least 2 types of that strategist or maybe microorganisms can be enriched. One is the R strategist. Usually they prefer to survive in high substrate concentration conditions. But for the K strategist, usually they prefer that low substrate concentration. And also correlating to the engineering aspect, usually we apply 2 types of that reactor configurations. One is that plug flow reactor. In this reactor, that substrate concentration will vary from high concentration to the quite low concentration. And this can dynamic, that conditions, maybe R strategist will be enriched. But for another type of that reactor configuration, for example, here, that completely mixed reactor, because the substrate concentration always the same, equals to that effluent. So on this condition, substrate concentration will be constant and always at a low concentration. At this condition, maybe K strategist will be enriched. So this is the hypothesis for this study. We thought maybe tetracycline can be removed by enriching this K strategist. So that's why for the methodology, we adopted two operational modes. One is that by feeding the reactor quickly within 20 minutes. And this condition that seems to that plug flow reactor. And also another one, we use that constant feeding. This lasts for 23 hours. So this is similar to that completely mixed reactor. And also for each type of this operational mode, we have two reactors. One is the control, one with the addition of that tetracycline. And also, because for the tetracycline cannot be removed directly, and usually they should be through that co-metabolism. So we also added typical organic carbon here that includes that peptone and also glucose that represents that protein and also carbohydrate.
Guangxu, has he? Did he just lose connection there?
He froze on mine, Liam, so I think he's dropped off.
Yeah.
He's frozen mine as well. I don't think
Yeah,
he's
he
in the room
did.
anymore.
Yeah, I think it might have connection.
What should we do? Run over time as it is.
I think in the interest of time, Liam, it's probably best to proceed with the discussion for the panelist members that are
Here.
present. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, because we have our next session in 15 minutes. So
Yeah.
And Alex, I'll just make you host now as well.
Okay.
Co-host. Liam. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well that was actually a really interesting session. Can you all see this? Can you all see the slide for the next session?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Yeah. So we'll be back from our break at 10:45 for the next session.
Yeah. Okay, and thanks to all the presenters. Thank you very much. Thanks to Parvin and to Alistair and Martin and Guangxu.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I think okay. I think Liam, I need you to get the co-host or something.
Hey, Guangzhou,
Yeah, yeah.
I apologize. You crashed out on us there, and we're running over time anyhow. We went to break prior to the next session.
Okay, okay.
I don't know what happened. We've been having some technical issues yesterday, but I think you may have lost your Wi-Fi signal and just crashed out.
Yeah, yeah, okay. That should be fine.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alexandre de Menezes. I hope you can all hear me fine. I'm chairing this session now, which is focused on, so the focus area for this session is on people, nature, and environment. I got 4 speakers lined up, but I'm going to start with the keynote speaker, which is Dr. Olena Pareniuk. Olena is a senior researcher in the Institute for Safety Problems of Nuclear Power Plants of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. And she's interested in the microbiology of radioactive sites, particularly the contaminated sites around the Chernobyl and Fukushima exclusion zones. And she's also interested in the bacterial communities inhabiting the exploded reactor in the Chernobyl exclusions and the Chernobyl power plant. So Chernobyl, Olena is a collaborator of mine, and I asked her to give the keynote talk today. But there's one small problem, that she's actually in Ukraine right now. And that means that she has to deal with power cuts, and it will be too difficult for her to present live. So she recorded a presentation. And the presentation is actually focused on the issue related to nuclear bombing. I mean, the risk of nuclear bombing and how can societies deal with that. So bear with me for a moment, and I will share the presentation.
Hi, my name is Elena Perenyuk, and I'm from Ukraine. I'm currently in Zhytomyr. It is the city 130 kilometers from Kiev. So that's why you see me in such a dramatic look. Currently, we are having a power outages, and the current outage has been for 4 hours already. And when we don't have any power supply, we actually don't have the internet connection. So I'm pre-recording my video right now in case I won't be able to join you tomorrow. Anyway, in case I will be able to join, I will be really happy to answer all of your questions, if any. So today I'm going to present you a video about the radionuclide contamination that might result the nuclear bombing, and what issues should be considered for the following cleanup procedures. My talk will be quite unexpected because I will mostly focus on the health issues. I won't talk about radionuclide contamination that much. So I'm a senior researcher in the Institute for Safety Problems of Nuclear Power Plants of the National Academy of Sciences, and we currently having quite a lot of experience. So talking about the estimated global nuclear warhead inventories as of 2022. 1 year ago, I am a radiobiologist. I have a background in microbiology and radiobiology and radioecology. So 1 year ago, I was not expecting that my expertise will be needed for a wide public. Everything was quite focused on the nuclear disaster emergency preparedness and on the issues that might come up in case of the minor or major nuclear accidents. But right now, we've been living during the 8 months in the full-scale war with Russia. And it has been quite a challenge for all of our population and all of our scientists. Just a little bit of the background. In 1991, Ukraine gave up our nuclear inventory, and we, when we were giving up our nuclear weapons, we got the confirmation from Russia, the UK, and the US that they will protect our territorial integrity, and in case of any kind of assault, all of those countries promise to protect the territorial integrity. Anyway, Russia attacked us on February this year, and it showed that actually that is necessary to consider all of the emergencies that might occur. So currently, for already 7 months or something like that, we are living under the constant threat of the nuclear terrorism, and Russia claims that it will use the nuclear bomb on the territory of Ukraine for protecting its territorial integrity or for Russia's own sake. So that is why we have quite a lot of experience in preparing ourselves to surviving the nuclear war. So as for now, two major countries that have nuclear warheads are Russia, which has almost 6,000 nuclear warheads, and the United States. Of course, we are not sure about the state of the nuclear warheads in Russia because it is necessary to take care of it. It is also necessary to be sure that the half-life period is not expired, and it is necessary to be sure that the critical mass of the warhead is still in place. But anyway, even considering all of these technical issues, we still need to understand that Russia has enough nuclear weapon to bomb not only the territory of Ukraine, but the territory of the whole world. I would say the territory of the whole sane world. And that is why it is really, really important for all of us, for all of the scientists, to consider what might be the consequences and how can we prevent or how can we get ourselves ready to this kind of the consequences. So currently, there is a division of different kinds of the nuclear weapon. So as the military experts in Ukraine would say, even in case if Russia will decide to bomb Ukraine with a nuclear bomb, it will probably use tiny, that is less than 1 kiloton introtile equivalent or small nuclear bombs. So it gives us a certain freedom to emphasize that the consequences of the catastrophe and the consequences of the bombing won't be global. So it will be any kind, it might be any kind of the tactical weapon, and that tactical weapon could actually be used on the front line in order to give some tactical advance to a Russian military. Anyway, as you can see by the graph, the diameter of the fireball and the height of the Martian and even the diameter of the radioactive fallout cloud won't be that huge. It means that most of the people will survive the nuclear bombing, and it is actually necessary to predict what are we going to do in case of this nuclear bombing and how can we protect ourselves. So usually nuclear explosion will consist of 5 major components, which is the flash that can cause the blindness. It is a blast wave. It is a radiation, immediate radiation that was caused by the nuclear explosion. It is fire and heat that can cause death, burn, and injuries and damage to the structures. And of course, it is the electromagnetic pulse and the radioactive fallout. What is also necessary to understand that the diameter, the impacted diameter won't be that huge, but yet there can be quite a lot of population that can be impacted. So for sake of this conference, using the nuke map, it is a web resource that all of you can use. It lets us to estimate the consequences of the nuclear bombing of the certain territory. For this conference, I decided to model what will happen if we will drop the nuclear bomb tiny nuclear bomb of 1 kiloton in the very city center of Kiev on our parliament, which is Verkhovna Rada. So you can see that it will be 5,500 of deaths, and about 10,000 of casualties. And also, in case the wind will blow in the direction of Moscow, also there will be some territory that will be contaminated due to the fallout. And something I would like to focus on is how can we prepare the public to facing this kind of accident. For example, in Ukraine, after Chernobyl, we have situation when radioactive iodine will affect our thyroid quite a lot, because we don't have enough normal iodine, because we don't eat that much fish globally in Ukraine, because Ukraine is a very continental country. So there are quite a lot of people who are very much afraid of radioactive iodine. So our answer to this kind of communication is actually jokes. So we would say that if you live close to the nuclear explosion, you don't actually need the potassium iodine. If you live far away from for the nuclear explosion, you don't need the potassium iodine because you're far away. But if you live close, if you live in the epicenter, or if you live in the ground zero, it will never help you because, well, basically you're in epicenter. And something that I wanted to discuss with you is not the radionuclide contamination, not the consequences for the environment, but the consequences for people. Because right now, together with my colleagues, we have been given quite a lot of lectures about how to prepare ourselves to the nuclear bombing. And it is a very fantastic experience because you have to actually explain people what are radionuclides, how are radionuclide contamination working, and what can you actually do. So that is why, of course, during our lectures, we will focus on the surviving modes, we'll focus on the measures to survive the radioactive fallout. But nevertheless, one of the most important issues for us is actually protecting the mental health. And the mental health will be the main in terms of surviving the nuclear bombing. So it is very, very important to stay sane and be able to actually use all of the measures that people are usually sharing. So that is why we would usually say that it is very important to have some books for reading, to have some board games for playing, to have some candles like me, for example, right now, to survive this moment when you will have no electricity, to have some warm clothes because it's winter and you have to survive the situation when you have no heating at all. So all in all, as a result of, well, 7 to 5 months of the preparing ourselves to nuclear bombing, I would say that the issue of the mental health and the issue of communication between people is the most important. Because if you're not the designated specialist, the designated nuclear emergency specialist who should know how to react, it will be very difficult to stay calm and safe. And that's when we are facing the real topic of this talk, is that radiation experts and nuclear experts really need to come up with some ideas about surviving the nuclear bombing and staying safe. And I can say that, of course, we have all of the shelters, we have all of the food and water supply prepared. But the most important is to stay connected, protect each other, and take care of each other. And I'm thanking you very much for your attention, and I hope that I will have some questions. Thank you.
Hey everyone, so because Olena couldn't be here in person, if you have any questions for her, you can send it to me and I can email it to her. And I know her presentation is a bit short, but in the interest of time and just to carry on, I'll carry on as normal with the next presentation in this session, and then if you have any questions for Olena, just let me know. But the next talk is also going to be a recorded talk, because the speaker is called Paul Socius, and he couldn't be here today due to prior commitments. But Paul is he's a graduate in biotechnology from the University of Barcelona, and he has a master's degree in applied microbiology from again the Autonomous University of Barcelona. But he's currently doing a PhD. Also in the same Marie Curie program as Parvin, so the M2X Horizon 2020 Marie Curie ITN project, that's basically exploiting metal microbe applications in the circular economy. But Paul's work in particular is related to the performance of constructed wetlands to remove metals and pharmaceuticals from contaminated effluents. So I will share his presentation. And just a second, share screen. If you have any questions, I forgot to say this at the start. If you have any questions, can you just drop them in the Q&A, using the Q&A button, and at the end, well, if these are questions for the remote speakers, I have to contact them and ask them. Or I'll try to answer them myself if I know the answer. But for the ones that the speakers are actually going to talk in person, you can any questions that you have, you can use the Q&A button to ask them, and then we'll discuss them at the end. Thank you.
My name is Pablo Rasucias, and I will present the project titled Anaerobic Digestion Effluent Treatment in Constructed Wetlands for Agricultural Reuse. I conducted the research at the CIMAR at the University of Porto in Portugal, and finally here at the University of Galway. Anaerobic digestion is a well-known biotechnological process to valorize organic waste into bioenergy projects. The projects of anaerobic digestion are the biogas and the digestate, that is a complex and concentrated matrix of biosolids, and is a valuable source of carbon and nutrients. And that's why it has commonly used as a fertilizer or as a soil amender. However, the digestate is a reservoir of many pollutants, such as nutrient phosphorus, high concentration of nutrient phosphorus, metallic trace elements, pharmaceuticals and organic contaminants, and pathogens and AMR as well. So the application in soils of digestate can be a risk for the environment and human health. So we need effective treatment strategies to reduce the digestate. Constructed wetlands are systems that mimic natural wetlands to treat polluted waters through a combination of biological, chemical, and physical processes. These systems are studied to remove the high concentration of nutrients in the digestate, but there are no studies regarding other contaminant removal of the digestate. So in this project, we focus on the potential of constructed wetlands to remove contaminants such as metals and antibiotics and antibiotic resistant genes from the liquid digestate to valorize it in fertirrigation. Then the project also will focus on the plant valorization and on the microbial community ecology. This project is part of the M2EX network that aims to exploit metal microbe applications to expand circular economy. So 12 vertical subsurface flows constructed wetlands were set up in plastic containers with a bottom layer of gravel, a second layer of light expanded clay aggregate, and a third layer of sand in which Sparganium erectus plants were transplanted. These plants were collected in Ribeira do Cargo, a stream in Portugal, and the systems were in greenhouses under a natural light-dark regime at the gardens of the Faculty of Sciences at the University of Porto. For 1 month and a half, the systems was the acclimation process. First, the systems were treated with a nutrient solution for the plants adapt and to the system, and then in the system we added a dilution of the liquid digestate. First, we started with a 1:10 dilution. We continued with a 1:4 dilution, and finally with a 1:2 dilution of the liquid fraction. The reason was for the plants adapt to this complex matrix and the microbial communities as well. So in the experiments, this diagram represents the systems in the greenhouse. Constructed wetlands were treating 4 different influence. The C systems were treating the liquid digestate without any doping. The OX systems were treating the liquid digestate with oxytetracycline. The SD systems were treating liquid digestate doped with sulfadiazine. And finally, the OF systems were treating liquid digestate with ofloxacin. The treatment cycles were last for 14 days. The first day, we added the fresh liquid digestate. Every day, the effluent was recirculated in the wetland, and we recirculated the effluent for 14 days. At the last day, the wetland was emptied and the effluent was collected for analysis. This process was repeated 6 times in these 6 treatment cycles. So, in the effluent, we analyzed the organic matter, the nutrients, the trace metals, the antibiotics, and the antibiotic-resistant genes. And the microbial communities through 16S hyper-throughput sequencing. First, the preliminary results of the liquid digestate characterization. The digestate was coming from a biogas plant treating organic fraction of municipal solid waste. The digestate had a high content of solids, 9.6%, and 70 grams per liter of COD. The nutrients analyzed were way more higher than the parameters of irrigation waters, and similar regarding the trace metals. In the digestate, the concentration of these metals were higher than the guidelines of irrigation waters, and except for lead. So this digestate needed to be treated. For Sparganium erectum acclimation, we saw that the plants had a good acclimation. Along the experiment, the number of individuals increased, and as we can see in the picture, the biomass as well increased. So the plants present good adaptation in the systems and with this matrix, because in other cases, the other plants could not tolerate this high concentration of nutrients. But these plants showed a good adaptation to the digestate. Here we can see the influent and the effluent. So there was a change in the color, and the effluent was way more clearer and transparent than the influent. And in these bar charts, we represent the removal efficiencies. Each bar chart group represents one treatment cycle. This is the first one until the sixth treatment cycle, and the different colors represent the different treatments. So for the organic matter removal, we have COD levels of 14 grams per liter in the influent and around 1 gram per liter in the effluent. So the systems are removing organic matter. Regarding the nutrients, we analyze ammonium and nitrate, nitrate, and phosphate ions, and the systems perform good removal efficiencies, over 80% removal efficiency. So we obtain good performances. And regarding the metals, we analyze iron, zinc, copper, manganese, lead, and chromium. And we obtain in all the cases very high removal efficiencies, over 80%. Manganese presented the lowest one, and it represents more than over 80% of removal efficiency. So the systems were removing metals. And regarding the genes, in this slide, we present the results of abundances of the class 1 integrin integrase gene that is a proxy for anthropogenic pollution and is related to mobile genetic elements that can be transferred between bacteria. We see that in the influent, the relative abundance is lower than in the effluent. So along the recirculation of the effluent in the constructed wetlands, there is an increase of the abundance of these genes. We still don't have the results of the removal efficiency of the antibiotics, so we can't perform the discussion of these genes, but what we can conclude is that these systems are suitable to remove metals and antibiotics and nutrients and organic matter from the liquid fraction of anaerobic digestion. And we still have to analyze as well the relative abundance of genera of potential pathogens to see if these systems are suitable as well to remove these potential pathogens. And I thank you very much for your attention. I will be very pleased to answer your questions and your suggestions if you send them by email. My email is written here, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks everyone for watching Paul's presentation. Like he said in the end, if you have any questions, just you can email him. If you didn't catch his email address, you can let me know, and then I'll contact him. So the next presentation, Rose, I hope everything's okay for you to present. It's a bit early, but I hope everything will be okay. So, okay, so if everything's okay, so the next presenter is Rose, who is a PhD student working on a collaborative project between Chagas and Chagas Moor Park and Chagas Johnstown Castle and Eniwa. So Rose is an early career researcher, and her project is studying metagenomic analysis and novel statistical approaches to examine antimicrobial resistance profile of Irish soils. Rose is interested in studying AMR in soil microbiome with a broader goal of understanding how AMR gets transferred between plants and animals in the ecosystem, and then how they enter into the food chain. So Rose, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Alex. Can you see my main screen or my...
I can see your screen, but I think you need to move to presentation mode.
Perfect. Is that okay now?
Yes.
Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is Rose, and thank you, Alex, for a really nice introduction. And so over the next few minutes, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to my PhD project, exploring Irish soil as a reservoir for antimicrobial resistance. So it's early days of research, so I don't have too many preliminary results, but we'll go through a few of them and what we expect to do in this PhD project. So my work is with 3 amazing scientists who bring their expertise from computational biology, soil microbiology, and machine learning to this project. So we have heard quite a few amount of research on antimicrobial resistance. So a brief overview: AMR is when microbes would adapt over time and they no longer respond to the medicines that were either inhibiting their growth or killing them. Why is this important? It's currently responsible for more than 33,000 deaths every year in European Union alone, and cost an estimated 1.5 billion euros every year in healthcare cost and productivity. So you can ask me, why are we looking at soil for this? Believe it or not, soil is the source of more than half of clinically relevant antibiotics that we use today. So if these are compounds that were produced by microorganisms in an arms race against these microorganisms, the other microbes needed antimicrobial resistant genes to grow in the presence of these, so making soil a natural reservoir for antimicrobial resistant genes. And unfortunately for us soil microbiologists, approximately 70% of the soil microbes remain uncharacterized, mainly because of the fact that many of these microbes cannot actually be cultured in the laboratory, making it, there's a huge knowledge gap. And in the recent years, we have used molecular techniques like shotgun metagenomics that we use in this current study to kind of bridge this knowledge gap. So I'm sure I don't have to explain this at this point. From a One Health approach, AMR has been considered as a critical One Health issue. Multitude of factors contribute to antimicrobial resistance, from animals to humans to contaminated environment. And in the current project, what we are interested is in identifying to what extent is the soil in Ireland actually contaminated with antimicrobial resistant genes. And once we identify the profile or the extent of this contamination, then we can backtrace it to where are these antimicrobial resistant genes coming from, or to what extent is it getting back into our food and feed chain. So we have 136 soil samples collected from across Ireland, and we have done shotgun metagenomic sequencing. So by this, we would be looking at the entire soil microbiome, or the profile of microbes present in each of these soil sample, by trying to look at their genomic information. So the main objectives of my current study is, 1, to identify the soil microbiome of Ireland, which are the prevalent taxa that are present do they contribute in nitrogen fixation, or are they pathogenic bacteria? To identify the antimicrobial resistance profile of our soil, so which are the main antimicrobial resistance classes that are present. We saw a presentation yesterday where they have identified quite which are the main antimicrobial resistant classes in the water. So it would be nice to then look at what are there in soil. And three, and most importantly, working with data analysis in my project, and after doing a literature review, what we have realized is that there is a huge need to optimize the bioinformatic pipelines that we use to both identify the taxonomy and the antimicrobial resistance. So this was a recent paper that was published, and what they had done was they took whole genome sequence of carbapenem resistant clinical isolates of multiple levels, and they gave it to 9 different participants or 9 different groups. And when they were left to their own devices to identify the antimicrobial resistance profile, what they found out was that they came up with identifying different antimicrobial resistant genes or gene variants. So again, going back to my point that there's a huge need to optimize these bioinformatic pipelines, and especially in a complex environment like soil, which has not received a lot of attention in the recent years, like gut microbiome. So how do we go about looking at the antimicrobial resistance in shotgun data? So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the 3 points at which I would be looking at our data to identify antimicrobial resistance. So we know soil has, if not millions, trillions of microbes, but for our understanding, let's break it down to 3 microbes represented here by 3 different colors. So from the shotgun data, once we get multiple small fragments of the genome of these microbes of our interest. And what you can see here, there are some black fragments which did not come from our environment of interest. So the first step would then be to remove the contaminants or the contaminant reads. For soil, it can be from the DNA of the farm animals, it can be the arthropod DNA, so on. And when we look at our data from this point of view, it's called read-based analysis. And at this point, we could try to identify which microbes do each of these fragments belong to, or does these fragments have antimicrobial resistant genes? So that would be one way of looking at my data. Another way would be then to take these multiple reads and from the overlapping reads, create a long continuous contact. And from this contact, try to identify which are these contact, where are they coming from, which are the microbes, or if these contacts have antimicrobial resistant genes. And it would be better to look at antimicrobial resistant genes from an assembly point of view, because there would be a better chance of identifying if there are particular genes before or after our antimicrobial resistant gene of interest. And last but not the least, a booming area of research is to reconstruct metagenome assembled genomes. So we're trying to reconstruct the entire genome of these microbes that we sequenced initially. Why is this of special relevance to soil? If you remember, most of our environment microbes are actually not culturable, which was having a huge knowledge gap. So to gain any genomic insights, we need to assemble metagenome assembled genomes to study these unculturable microbes better. So some ongoing works and exciting research for future is we have been doing the read analysis, and we looked at multiple taxonomic classifiers that are currently available. So Metaflan, Kraken, Kaiju were a few of them that I tried. And you can see here that most of our reads actually remain unclassified. And so all these 3 were looking at bacteria, archaea, fungi, virus, and you can see that quite a huge amount of reads actually remain unclassified. So there might be a large amount of the soil microbiome can be unclassified because they are underrepresented in the databases. And here, using a custom Kraken database, just looking at bacteria and archaea, what we found was there's a jump in the amount of classified reads. So we are currently creating an in silico mock community to further investigate this. And our hypothesis is that both Kaiju and Kraken actually don't incorporate MAGs. So since most of our soil microbes are actually not cultured, a lot of mags have been deposited. They may have to be used to gain a better understanding of the soil microbiome community. And so again, some preliminary results from looking at the antimicrobial resistance profile or the stress genes that are present in our soil. What was interesting to me was that arsenate and arsenite were second most abundant and fourth most abundant class of stress genes that were present in Irish soil. So I went back and did a bit of reading. So both there was a report in 2008, Trace Elements and Metals in Irish Soil, and an FSAI report that actually says that average Irish soil contains more arsenic than mainland Europe, slightly lower than England and Wales. And you can see here that there are multiple samples from where we actually didn't get a hit for arsenic or arsenate or arsenite genes. So it'll be worthwhile to go back and look if there's any geographic clustering of these samples that actually show arsenate and arsenite genes. And if there are any particular taxa that are associated with this presence of genes. So those would be something to look for. And last but not the least, so we did try to identify or recover a few mags, and from an initial pipeline meta-RAP that was run, so we could recover 59 mags, 50 of bacterial mags and 9 archaeal mags, but of them only 4 were of high quality, which means the mags had more than 90% completeness and less than 10% contamination. So what was interesting here was that all the 59 mags actually matched to soil mags or peat mags that have already been submitted in GenBank. So I think this again proves the point that we cannot completely rule out mags going forward in our studies, especially looking at an environment like soil, where we can't actually culture most of the microbes. So we are trying to optimize even this pipeline to see if we can recover more mags from the data. So these are a few of my end goals. Mainly would be to optimize bioinformatic pipelines and to create machine learning tools where possible tailored for soil metagenome, and to identify the extent of antimicrobial resistance in Irish soil. So going forward, we know what we are working with, and create a reference soil microbiome database that would be available to global soil researchers. So yeah, that's me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Rose. That was a great presentation. Rose, can I just ask you one question?
Yes.
And then people may have other questions, which if they haven't put in the Q&A session, then they can maybe we can discuss at the end. But right now, I just wanted to ask you one thing. So the mags, did you have time to analyze them and check if they had any AMR genes in them?
No, we haven't. So I've been mainly focusing on the taxonomic part of it. So that's something for the future. Yeah. No, we haven't looked at the mags.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Rose. So if you could stay on, then if there are more questions, we can discuss at the end of the session.
Okay.
Thank you. Right, Ali, can you hear me, Ali? So next speaker.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, hi, Ali. So Ali, thank you for joining. I'm just going to introduce you, and then if you could share your presentation.
Perfect.
Okay, so just a second. So next presenter is Ali Khan, who he is also an early career researcher. And Ali hails from Pakistan, where he did his bachelor degree in agronomy at PMS Ali Shah Arid Agriculture University. He also did a master's, I believe, in South Korea, again in agricultural sciences in Kyungpook University.
Yeah.
But right now, Ali is in his second year of his PhD at Chagask Johnstown Castle, where he's studying the environmental and economic sustainability of biogas and biomethane production through anaerobic digestion of slurry and various grass feedstocks. So Ali is interested in greenhouse gas emissions, related to the use of inorganic and organic fertilizers. And he has a general interest in greenhouse gas emissions, also directly from indirect methane emissions. So thank you, Ali. So whenever you're ready.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So good morning, everyone. My name is Ali Sultan Khan, and I'm a PhD student based in Chagas Johnson Castle. I'm being supervised by Dr. Dominica Kroll and Dr. John Finn in Johnston Castle and Dr. Alexander de Meneses in University of Galway. And today I'm going to talk about the environmental sustainability of producing the grass feedstock for the AD. So before I start, I want to say that the future of the whole world is actually in green energy, sustainability, and renewable energy. And anaerobic digestion can help in achieving that goal, as it is a low energy process and which makes it actually more environment friendly. So before that, I want to show what actually anaerobic digestion process is. So it starts from the feedstock. Feedstock can be anything which have any organic carbon. It can be animal waste products, seaweed sludge, your lawn clippings, your leaves, and anything. So they are actually digested in an anaerobic digester to produce the biogas. And then the waste, the solid or liquid waste, which is produced from that AD plant, then which can be separated into solid or liquids if needed, or if it is not needed, it can be used as a digestate into the land, and then as a fertilizer to produce the crops, and that crop is again used as a feedstock. So it behaves like a circle. And the biogas which is produced from the AD process is then can be purified into biomethane, which can be used for the transport purposes, or which can be introduced into your like national grid, and then that gas is again used for the crop production. And the third avenue is actually the combined heat and power unit, which actually works, which actually operates on the biogas produced to produce the heat and electricity to maintain the optimum temperature for the AD reactor also. And then again, that energy is also used to produce the feedstocks again. So why in Ireland? So Irish farming is almost all about grass, and the grass-based anaerobic digestion plants actually have more of a more favor to the Irish agriculture sector, as the energy balance of biomethane production from the grass is actually more better, as we are using the biofuel crops to produce the biomethane. And then if in this picture, you can actually see that there is a huge, about like 52% of the Irish energy mix is produced from the high carbon sources. So there's a need to decarbonize our energy supplies. And but if we talk about with every thing, there are some restrictions also. So the RED 2 limit, the renewable energy directive, actually says that any biomass fuels will try to achieve at least 70% of the greenhouse gas emission savings. So then if we are producing any feedstock for the anaerobic digestion, they have to be produced at the lower nitrogen application rates, because if we are producing anything with very high nitrogen application rates, which means that we're applying a lot of fertilizer also, and oil is equal to fertilizer. So in the end, we are again producing a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So my research objective is actually to see if we increase the plant diversity in our grassland swords, which are produced under low nitrogen inputs, and to see their yield, nitrogen cycling, especially nitrogen, and the associated greenhouse gas emissions. So the first objective is to see the agronomic performance of the grassland swords, which are produced with digestate and synthetic fertilizer. So So at the moment, I'm comparing the perennial ryegrass and 6 species in 6 species, we have like diversity of the plant communities, like 2 grasses, which are actually high carbon and high fiber. From the animal point of view, animal love the grass, and from AD point of view, it have high carbon, so which means our biogas production will be also higher if they are used as a feedstock. And 2 legumes, as we know, legumes are the nitrogen fixing crops, so they actually help in reducing our fertilizer dependence on, especially on the nitrogen-based fertilizers. And 2 herbs, which actually imparts the drought tolerance and improve the carbon cycling in the deeper root zones. And my second objective is to see the greenhouse gas emissions associated if we are using digestate as a fertilizer. So I'm comparing a calcium ammonium nitrate, which is a synthetic fertilizer, and AD digestate coming directly out of an AD plant. And my nitrogen application rates are actually 0, medium, and high. So if we talk about my current results, so in this slide, I'm going to talk about only the results from like 1/3 of my 1 year, so like 1 harvest out of the 3, which I'm going to get in the whole year. So this graph actually shows the dry matter yield of the 1 harvest only on the x-axis. 1 cluster actually shows 1 plant community, and on my y-axis, it is the actual yield, which I got in kgs per hectare. So in this graph, you can actually see that the plant diversity, especially on the panel on the left-hand side, which have like 6 species, it led to an increase in the dry matter yield, especially under the low and 0 nitrogen input conditions, which are actually shown by the purple and blue graphs, blue bars. And if I talk about my nitrous oxide emissions, again, on x-axis, I have 2 different plant communities. By y-axis, I have the nitrous oxide emissions produced in that period in grams per hectare. So there is a huge significant effect of increasing plant diversity in lowering the nitrous oxide emissions. And if we talk about how much nitrous oxide is actually produced in producing 1 unit or per unit of dry matter, the 6 species soils were actually much lower in producing more dry matter by producing less nitrous oxide emission. So if we talk about way forward for the Irish agriculture, the price volatility for the synthetic fertilizer in the recent era is affecting the agriculture, and there is a increasing pressure, especially after the Paris Agreement, to decrease our agricultural greenhouse gas emissions, and which also calls for reducing our fertilizer usage. And which can be achieved by increasing the plant diversity, which can in our grassland source, and we already have some of the research coming out of Johnstone Castle, which actually shows that if we increase the plant diversity, it actually helps in maintaining the same yield with lower fertilizer inputs. So increasing the plant diversity can help in maintaining the grassland yield with much lower fertilizer inputs. And coming back to the main message, like AD technology can help in decarbonizing our energy supplies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ali. Very interesting presentation. So, Ali, I just wanted to ask you a couple of things. Before, if anyone else has a question, please just send it on the Q&A button. Use the Q&A button, please. But Ali, in terms of using AD as a fertilizer, I presume that in terms of the different feedstocks will obviously have different implications, right? For how safe it is to use.
Yeah.
So do they have to be characterized before they use it as fertilizer for contaminants, for example? Or is it just a case of the source? If you're using like feedstocks from crops, you can basically don't worry about it, you know?
Yeah, I think it would depend on what kind of feedstock you're using, especially if you're using the like sewage sludge or municipal waste as as your feedstock. Then yeah, they have to be characterized before that. But in my case, I'm using a mix like 60% slurry and 40% grass silage only. So especially if you are including your sewage sludge, there is a possible stream of some pathogens or microbes coming in, unwanted microbes coming into that stream. But especially even with slurry also, before you use it for the anaerobic digestion, it has to be characterized, like if some of the animals, if they have some like infection or something, then it has to be characterized before that slurry can be introduced into the anaerobic digester.
And what about antimicrobial resistance genes in the slurry? So the AD removes that?
It actually, like, I cannot say that it 100% removes that, but actually, like there are already some of the research done that AD actually helps in removing some of the microbes, because it is being carried out at like between 39 to 40 degrees centigrade. So it helps in killing some of those microbes, and especially if I'm talking about from the fertilizer point of view or grassland point of view, it actually helps in removing some of the weed seeds also coming in.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ali. I don't see yet any questions in the Q&A session, but I actually, I wanted to ask Rose a question. Rose, are you still there?
Yes, yes.
Okay, hi, Rose. Rose, I wanted to ask you one thing about AMR in soil bacteria. So it's not surprising that you would find AMR in soil, because a lot of these antibiotics were derived originally from soil bacteria. But if you find an AMR, so the antibiotics were derived from soil bacteria, so it's expected that other bacteria will have resistance to it to some extent, right? So my question is, when you find AMR genes in soil, what is the significance of that from a health point of view, or even from an agricultural point of view? Would there be different types of AMR that you'd be more concerned about than others? And can you assess that based on the metagenomic data?
So there has been a good few studies. There was a functional study where they found that the soil bacteria had resistance to major classes of antibiotics. And the AMR genes they found were 100% identical to what you would find in clinical pathogens. So there is some kind of transfer. And I think it's very important to kind of keep on track of to what extent is the antimicrobial resistance in soil getting transferred to other environment. Like there's also recent studies that notice that on the surface of fruits or soil products, there's a lot of recent studies that look at lettuce or strawberries that are constantly in contact with soil. To what extent is it getting passed on to our food? So to keep a track of what is happening, it'll always be there. Soil will always have antimicrobial resistance gene, but to what extent is there the transfer, and is that transfer important for us? Is that transfer those antimicrobial resistance actually giving you resistance to major classes, or is it multi-drug resistant bacteria that are getting transferred? These would all be of clinical importance, I think.
Okay, and with the metagenomic data, how easy it is to assess, for example, the likelihood that those genes may be transferred from one ecological compartment to another?
So you would need to monitor both the soil and the crops at the same time to see that, we found these and they're getting transferred. It is possible, but with metagenomic data, you can do a lot. It's just about how you ask the question and what you're looking for. Culture techniques would always be important, and to actually check that these genes are active, or try to look at functional metagenomics would also be important, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think this concludes the session, this focus session, because I don't see any questions in the Q&A. So that means that we have a bit of a longer break than expected. So the next session will be at 12:15. So you can have a break. But I want to come to thank all the speakers. We had a quite varied session, going from nuclear issues in Ukraine to more issues that are relevant to Ireland with agriculture and antimicrobial resistance in Irish soils, and the issues of agricultural sustainability. So I wanted to thank the speakers for speaking to us today, and I'm looking forward to the next session. Thank you, and see you back at 12:15. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back from the break. My name is Dr. Sinead Duane, and I'm a lecturer in marketing at the JE School of Cairns School of Business and Economics, and I'm also chair for today's session. I'd like to welcome everybody to the session on the cross-cutting theme of behavioural change, behavioural and societal change. This session will showcase the role of behavioural and societal change when addressing complex issues such as our One Health focus areas. And I'm delighted to introduce to you today today's speaker, Professor Sharon Rundle-Tyndall. Professor Sharon Rundle-Tyndall is a practicing marketer and scientist, and she has applied her marketing techniques to many different themes in the area of One Health, including the protection of the planet across a wide range of contexts, including reducing food waste, protecting wastewaters, and protecting koalas as well. Unfortunately, due to the time difference, Sharon is unable to be with us today as she's based in Australia, but she recorded her presentation earlier, and she is going to talk to us today about the role of marketing, more specifically social marketing, can have in protecting our health and the health of our environments. Sorry, guys. I think there's a problem with the sound there, so we can start again. Apologies. It should be working now.
Hi, my name's Sharon Rundle-Tyndall, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you all the way from down under. Unfortunately, our time zones mean that I can't necessarily jump into the room with you, and I'm really sorry that I actually couldn't be there to talk with you in person. But it is great to be here today, and thank you so much for extending the invitation to have me. Today, I'm going to talk about social marketing and how can marketing help you to actually improve your work in the space of health and well-being. Now, when we're actually working with people, it's very, very difficult to figure out where to actually start, because by nature, humans learn from each other. They act and interact together. And the way I see this is that we're working very hard to untangle very complex social issues, and health and well-being is certainly one where our own how we feel and how we are is very much shaped by where we live. And we certainly know that people from low socioeconomic backgrounds have far less opportunity sometimes to even make the choices that are supportive of their health and well-being. And with this bigger picture surrounding us, understanding where we can start and how we can start to make differences and improve people's health and well-being is a challenge for all of us. And I think it's important for our own practices to always be mindful that it's not so easy for the people sometimes that need the help the most. And having that embedded across your practice is such an important path of how we can actually will move forward. Now, I'm a marketer by background, and I did a PhD that was all about how can I sell more wine to more people more often. My background is commercial marketing. I was trained to sell products and to learn how to actually shape them into a way that they'd be more appealing for a market. Now, how do you translate that into the space of health and well-being? And the answer is a discipline called social marketing. Not everyone who calls themselves a social marketer is trained in commercial marketing by background, but they certainly have learned to actually take on some or many of the tools that marketers actually use. The difference is that when I used to do marketing in a commercial setting, I was trying to actually, hit a budget or make a profit. And in the social space, that realm changes just a little in that our actual end goal is improved health and well-being. That means I don't necessarily have teams who are twinned to a budget. It means setting up the activities and what we actually do needs to change ever so slightly. And importantly, for someone who came from a commercial background, I've had to learn how to actually sell the things that people don't want to do. And that's a very huge difference between commercial marketing and this social marketing space. Because in commercial marketing, I was typically selling something that was faster or cheaper. It was improved or different in some way that was positive. In social marketing, I have to be a bit more creative because just sometimes on a cold, wet, windy day, sitting on the couch and watching Netflix or some other streaming service while you enjoy a piece of chocolate or a glass of wine is a lot more appealing than being outside trying to actually stay fit and look after yourself. So I've had to learn how to be pretty creative. What I want to explain is the process that our team have actually pioneered over the last decade as we translated commercial practice back out into social. Marketing is actually a strategic function. It places people at the heart of everything that we actually do. And our team have coined this strategic process CBE. So in short, we co-create solutions with people, we learn what they want, we build it, and then we get out there and make sure that they actually know about it. And that's that engage phase. Are people aware about your program, your service, or your something that's supporting their health and well-being? If they're aware, have they tried it? And if they have tried it and never come back, why not? Because the aim is that if you have a service and you've got some form of something that you're offering, you should have people wanting willingly to come back time and time again because what you've built is something that they actually want. But social marketing isn't just strategic in that putting people at the heart, whether you call it patient-centered care, human-centered design, user experience, I don't mind what the term actually is. Putting people at the heart of everything you do and understanding the world through someone else's eyes is the critical component for social marketing. But it's not just strategic, it becomes quite tactical too. And there's a great evidence base that we can actually start to draw upon that really tells us already what works. And in social marketing, we refer to these as the 8 benchmark criteria or 8 principles of practice that we actually use. These underpin everything that we actually do. Our aim, as we said at the start, is to start on people's health and well-being. So in the principles terminology, behaviour change. This means you have to make a decision and be very specific about what it is that you're trying to ask people to do, because that's your one core goal, your outcome, the thing that you're actually focusing upon. From here, you drive off into the co-creation phase. So you have stakeholders involved who actually have years of lived experience working in the space. Learn from them. What do we know that already works? We understand other programs or services are out there. So this is competition. Look at them, learn from them. What do they do well that people like and would willingly and want to actually see? These are ways that we can actually just look sideways. Who has tackled this same problem with some form of success? And it doesn't just have to be around the corner from you. It could be anywhere on the planet. You then need to take a theory. So in best practice, we can see now from the science and the evidence base that theory-informed programs will outperform other programs that have not thought about how people think and feel or not taken some sort of framework and actually applied it. So you may be familiar with Susan Mickey's COM-B framework. This one actually asks of people what capabilities do they have, what would their motivations to perform the behaviour be, and going back to this earlier point, not everyone has the same access and the same capacities. What opportunities are out there in this place and space that support the people to perform the behaviour you're looking at? That is one example, COM-B, of a theory that you could apply and map across your work. We've found so far when we've been mapping it across any context, it is a great way of finding some factors that we know can explain and predict behaviour. Now, if you've got budget and space and capacity, segmentation is something you should actually think about. This is a tool that breaks it all back down. Now, if you've ever been on Netflix or one of those streaming services, you would know, very much so, that segmentation is something that, the service provides you with exactly what you actually want. So my preferences pop up based on what I've watched before. But if I pop into the streaming service on someone else's account, completely different programs appear. That is an example of how that service is applying one-to-one marketing to you. Now, I think the best thing most of us have access to with our budgets is segmentation. Can we break users down into groups and understand the differences between groups and look at what that means for how our programs perform? If the budget's not there, don't worry about it. You can actually do this work qualitatively and in a cheaper way using things like personas. So descriptions of the different types of users that come to your service, your healthcare facility, that you can actually start to think about. So that's all of the learning research work. It's co-created with people. When I talked earlier about stakeholder orientation, the most critical stakeholder for anything you're doing are those different personas and those different user groups. So we have to make sure that we have the different types of people involved, learning what it is that they like and respond well to, and then taking all of that together, using it to actually go on to build the program. And so that's called insight. What are the key 3 or 4 things that users have really told you they need to see happen? How well now can you put that into action? And during the build phase, we think not only about the service or the product or the things that support the actions we need people to take, but also how we're going to make people aware about them. And so in marketing, you may have heard a term, the 4 Ps. It's a way of looking at a marketing mix. But can we do more than just talk to people? What are we putting in place that will really support them to take the actions that they need? Because if we can actually get that into place, we can support people to really make a difference. The final principle is exchange. So this is the moment when the magic happens. People come together, they actually engage with what it is that you actually have, and if you're successful, willingly are open to actually doing something different. That's when the magic happens. Behaviour change actually occurs. So we don't assume that people can do anything unless they've come together with us to actually act. So just think of it as coming together. So our best way of actually explaining how we both operate strategically with the co-create, build, engage framework, or CBE for short, and those social marketing benchmark criteria is explained in the most recent paper I've worked on with Daisy Lee. We worked in Hong Kong to see if we could actually get more students at a university to take up vaccinations, and it happened during COVID. So it was both flu vaccines and COVID-19 vaccines. But that paper describes very clearly the entire process used to learn what university students wanted. There were 4 different segments, including vaccine hesitant people, and then those who were highly motivated with a couple of groups in between. So I'll allow you to read that work in your own leisure and time, but it is, to me, the best description I have at hand right now to demonstrate to you how CBE can be applied to the work that you're actually doing. But for now, I'll actually give you a bit of an overview of some of the work that's emanated out of our centre over the past 10 years. This isn't just in the space of health, it's actually in a multitude of different spaces. The longest standing program running out of our centre is Blurred Minds, a program that's been built with students, teachers, it is mapped to Australian curriculum, and this one is tackling vaping, alcohol and drugs, changing hearts and minds for students. We also have a program protecting koalas and chasing a whole range of behaviours, including where dogs sleep at night. If they sleep inside, when a koala who is nocturnal comes down from a tree and crosses a yard, the dog can't get them. Now, the insight in this program was that dog owners wanted something fun. They wanted something that was dog focused, and it was broader wildlife focused and not just koalas. Now this, you can see, is an outcome. So if you Google leaveit.com.au, you can actually take a look at the dog training materials available online, and dogs sleeping and where they sleep at night is one thing, and the behaviour of wildlife aversion is a whole other. Tomorrow our app launches, which gives a dog training program out that's free for dog owners across southeast Queensland to take. In that, our one behaviour that we're chasing has actually been built in. This Sunday we'll be running Dog Fest, a festival that brings thousands of dog owners out, and we'll have Ryan Tate, who's in that app, at the festival talking to dog owners. Dog owners in our local region designed this program. They told us what they want. We simply built it and made it happen for them. Recently, we've been campaigning to get recreational fishers to go and target different fish. This would give fish like snapper and pearl perch a break. We also worked during the COVID-19 pandemic on making sure that people were actually practicing the COVID-19 behaviours. So by understanding and getting out there and co-creating something with community, we can actually get hundreds of thousands of leaves picked up, taken out of gutters, so they don't go down drains. And back to a health and wellbeing example. If you Google impactor.com.au, you can actually see the program that Yannick van Heerden built during his PhD program, which is all about promoting health and wellbeing. But really importantly, it's around mindset. Things like sleeping at night, being physically active, and putting telephones down to help support young people's mental health. Now, I would like today to just step you once more through that process that we actually use. I want to explain how marketing is applied to improve health and wellbeing, and I'll use the case study of Go Food, a program that was actually built for Department of Defence to encourage soldiers to make more healthy food choices. We applied the CBE process to build this program. We started off understanding through a whole series of different research techniques what it was that might motivate and help support people to actually make healthy food choices. Most recently, we were down in Albury repeating this work as we start to build the second phase for this trial program. So how did we co-create it? What did we actually do? This was an extensive study. So it started off, and there are a series of different papers. If you're interested, please just contact me and I'll more than happily send out anything if you don't have access. We actually ran a heap of interviews. Who is doing what where in the space of healthy eating, and what were stakeholders supportive of across the Department of Defence? Evidence reviews were used to look at healthy eating programs. And this was the study that taught us that if you do more than just promotion, behaviour change rates are more likely, because we actually analysed the collective programs that we sourced. But the real reality of that study was we were actually looking sideways like this to understand who in other departments of defence or other settings that were close to defence had attacked healthy eating in different ways. We ran store audits and went out and actually assessed food environments and how supportive they were for healthy eating. And we also observed soldiers in their own mess halls. What foods did they actually choose? So by standing there and taking photographs and just doing audits where we just counted people, we got to see what people were normally doing. And by goodness, do they go in and go fast, and they're out within 10 minutes. So you watch hundreds of people come through a hall right on the lunch hour. They pay $5 Australian to grab the meal. We learned that they were actually taking all sorts of different things, and it taught us all sorts of things that might be possible. We also interviewed staff and just chatted to them, and that was great because it actually disrupted our own expert bias, and by a lot. So collectively, all of those different studies actually were stakeholder oriented, and they allowed us to take that competitive assessment. Who had worked on this elsewhere? We had two theory perspectives guiding this particular piece of work, and what was missing was the segmentation piece. We did not run a large survey to break down healthy eaters during that early work, but we have since done that, and we have three clear segments. those that have the least education currently make the least healthy food choices. When we were down in Albury recently running our co-design work to understand what should this program look like in future, it looks remarkably different for the different 3 segments that we actually have. So how do we meet needs of all is now what we're actually currently sorting through as we move towards a pilot trial that will run next year. But looking backwards at Go Food iteration 1, we had 2 theories, socio-ecological model and dual process theory. So think of socio-ecological model as the individual nested within families and other social influences and spheres, and then ultimately living in their suburb or place or country, and how much that actually has a wider effect. My colleague Julia Cairns described this as peeling back the layers of the onion, and I do find that a fantastic analogy. Dual process theory was our other guiding theory. A lot of the decisions that we take are automatic. We do this out of habit. We actually do this so that we can think about other things. So if you are someone who finds yourself down the road and you just sort of wake up again, oops, not even how did I get there? But what you've done as you're driving your car is you've dropped into automatic and you've become aware again as something else kicks in. But what you're actually doing at the time is you're busy processing something else. So Daniel Kahneman talked about this as type 1 and type 2 thinking. And so that's another way for you to actually understand that theory if you haven't seen it before. But the reality is for eating decisions, the absolute majority of them are actually on automatic. We don't think about it. So knowing this is a really big part of how we start to actually step forward. So all of that collective research, and I am the first to say you don't always get all of this time to do all of this deep, deep work, teaches us a lot. We learned from the experts that controlling food supply is a defence issue. So that kind of makes it difficult at the individual soldier level to do things. Experts only knew about programs that actually flagged nutrients in a food. But most of us don't choose our food as a bunch of nutrients, and understanding that and learning how the other side thinks is really critical to change eating choices that people actually make. We learned from our observations that the availability of healthy options was there. We also saw flow paths that were really predictable. And so if we could interrupt those, we knew we could actually make a difference. We got to see commercial outlets and what sort of opportunities for healthy choices they had. A lot of them weren't actually offering healthy options, and they were cheaper options. So that's a bit of a competitive issue to actually deal with. And finally, soldiers taught us that they love to eat for performance. They actually want to beat their boss when they go for a run. So there's ways that we can support them by giving them more opportunities and really fast options that support the choices that maybe they would really love to actually take. We learned that pricing was actually $7 to $28 a meal for lunch, and that maybe we could actually, through promotion in our strategy, link healthy foods to performance. Within that mess hall that the Defence Department controlled, and they did have certain supply conditions for their food, that maybe we could just put healthy options up front. Let's make that healthy choice the easy choice. Maybe that would actually work. So what did we do? We actually created the express bar, and we repositioned the salad bar to actually essentially put health and those options first, front and centre. People had taught us that they did actually want to improve their own performance, and they already knew that eating healthy choices was a good choice. So take a look at how the express bar, so you can see the after on the right-hand side there, was placed front and centre. A lot of the soldiers in the deep interviews had told us that they would love a really fast meal option and something that felt great and left them full at lunch. So what did we put there in that express bar? Wraps, salads in a box that you can just take away. Quick, easy alternatives that people didn't even have to walk in and process. We interrupted where the non-healthy stuff was by just turning things around and making salad bar the first thing that people got to, not the last one, because previously they flowed out past the healthy options last. We made sure that the communications were just clear and they were about performance and just trying to help people actually understand, again, just a prompt, a reminder. these were not the front and center of this particular intervention. By diving deep and learning what people actually wanted, putting signposters in spots and actually interrupting the flow of traffic in and out of that spot, we were aiming to disrupt what they actually do. So to evaluate this campaign, because obviously it is important to understand, did what we do make a difference, we actually implemented across 2 sites a communication-only campaign and the environmental disruption. So one site got both communications and the disruption, so the change in the salad bar. Site 1 just got signs, posters, and pretty things. We counted 35,000 meals across that length of time, taking photographs of 673 plates of food. We got to observe 3,000 different choice decisions and understand what actually happened as a result of this particular program. So the ultimate outcome that we're actually looking for is to understand, did this intervention or the program as we apply marketing to try and disrupt eating make a difference? Now, the photographs of the food plates were what we actually used to assess healthfulness of a food choice. We had nutritionists who had a mapping system and the guides that we used, and all of the food counted in photographs was actually classified as either unhealthy, so red, right through to the green on the right-hand side, healthy options. So anything that was covered in fatty sauces is moderately to least healthful. Salads, etc. So pretty much not too much on them, most healthful. And you can see the results of the actual campaign here. So before and after are designated on each food category. And you can see that the least healthful and moderately healthful had both decreased through the trial, while most healthful options actually went up. So it demonstrates the power of taking marketing and diving super deep into the space and place to understand through other people's eyes what it is that they actually want to see happen. Marketing listens to people. It takes what's possible. So I fully comprehend this is why we use stakeholders and work with them heavily. Not everything is possible and not everything is going to deliver the consequence that we're hoping to get. So experts are very good at indicating something that might not work. Now, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about how you can apply marketing to get social change, I have this here for you as a couple of options. So the social change, how can marketing help, is an online, always available alternative free of charge. And then there are other online training options that do come with a fee. So on the left there, digital marketing and how we actually take things and get them online. How can we look, learn and listen and understand what people actually want? And finally, it's not in the context of health, but also a free resource that dives a lot deeper than the first social change course, is a course put together by Traffic that is all about animal conservation. So the examples are all conservation, but the principles and the practices are exactly the same. So that's just why I wanted to show you the breadth of where we've applied marketing to affect outcomes. So once again, thank you so much for having me here today. Please direct any questions through to me. I will be more than happy to field them outside of the event for you. And on behalf of the team who are here at Social Marketing at Griffith and my colleagues Julia Cairns and Timo Dietrich who built CBE, thank you very much for having me here today to explain how we apply marketing to improve health and well-being. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sharon, for the insightful presentation. And hopefully you can see a lot of opportunities to apply social marketing as a cross-cutting theme for the areas of One Health. We have used it here in the University of Galway in the PEER project, and we're looking at the how to improve our usage of blue and green, and blue spaces. I'd like now to hand over to Liam Morrison, who's going to give us a summary of today and to close today's event as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Sinead. Yeah, I guess it's my honor to once more the closing remarks to the Centre for One Health annual conference. We had some great presentations over the last 2 days across our 4 thematic areas of infectious disease and zoonoses, antimicrobial resistance, emerging pollutants, people, nature, and the environment. And I think all of the talks really have underpinned the One Health concept, that the health of people is connected to the health of animals and the environment, and that this approach is really its key to addressing our many environmental challenges that we face in the 21st century. I want to thank everyone that attended. I wanted to thank all of our keynote speakers and our early stage researchers for their presentations. I also want to say thanks to Nora O'Halloran. And I wish to thank all of our members who come from various schools and disciplines across NUI Galway or the University of Galway and further afield. And also a special thanks to our director, Professor Dervin Morris. And just wishing you all a good weekend, and thank you very much. Thank you.